We have a quorum, and as town moderator, I call the 2020 annual town meeting of the town of Belmont to order. (2022) annual town meeting to order. Let's be clear. It's been a long year. I'd like to, first of all, welcome the new town meeting members. We have more than 50 new town meeting members, which is, I think, some kind of record. It's very impressive. It's almost a fifth of town meeting. So welcome to those new town meeting members and to the many town meeting members who were reelected and those who didn't have to run but have stayed with us. So thank you all. And I'd like to thank all sorts of people for the work that it takes to put this town meeting together. Ellen Cushman and the town clerk staff, Dave Petto and the IT staff, Jeff Hansel at Belmont Media, the town administrator and her staff. This is a real team effort. It's probably much more work than people imagine. And it takes a lot of effort. And I want to thank everybody for pulling this off. I'd now like to turn to the Boy Scouts. We have a video from Belmont Media. The Boy and Girl Scouts of Belmont have a pledge and the presentation of the colors. So can we have Belmont Media do that?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good evening, town meeting. Tonight, we are gathered for the annual Belmont Town Meeting. My name is David Distinsky, Jr. I'm a first-class scout with the BSA. And I am speaking on behalf of the Cub Scout, Girl Scout, and BSA Scout programs. Thank you for letting us participate. As always, we are here to request of Massachusetts' best and nicest town clerk, Miss Ellen Cushman. Will the audience please rise? Will the color guard advance? Color guard, present the colors. Troop salute. Color guard dismissed. Color guard dismissed. Town meeting, please join us as we recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2. The audience may be seated. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Scouts dismissed.
Well, thank you so much. That was wonderful. We now will have the invocation from Pastor Dane Helsing of the Beacon Community Church.
Hi, friends. My name is Dane Helsing, and I serve as the pastor of Beacon Community Church right here in Belmont. It's a joy to have a few moments with you tonight, and just grateful for an opportunity to share some words of encouragement as you set out.
Maybe that will help.
No, I mean, you don't want to be in.
I also wanted to personally thank each of you for the diligent service that you Hi, friends. My name is Dane Helsing, and I serve as the pastor here at Beacon Community Church in Belmont. And I'm grateful for a few moments to share with you as you set out to do business tonight. I also wanted to thank you for the diligent service that you offer our town. I know that it's a labor of love, and just want you to know that you're appreciated for what you do. As a pastor, I've thought a lot about community, how you build it and how you maintain it. And what I want to do tonight, just for a few moments, is just to reflect on the role of humility in building community and maintaining community, the role of humility in community. A spiritual mentor of mine once said, at every stage of your life, pride is your greatest enemy and humility is your greatest friend. And this certainly holds true for town community. Are we teachable? Are we willing to listen to the thoughts and opinions of others, though they may be different than ours? Are we willing to do the hard work of really understanding each other and seeking to walk a mile in each other's shoes? What does it look like to consider the needs of others before our own? A first century letter written to a little community in northern Greece that had its own set of challenges and difficulties has been an encouragement to me, and I wanted to share this with you tonight. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or rivalry, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. So friends, my prayer for you as you meet tonight and do business, and for all of us as a town, is that our heartbeat would be humility and the result would be genuine community. So I hope you have a great meeting. Grace and peace to you all.
Thank you, Pastor Helsing. That was extremely appropriate. Those are very, very nice words. At this point, I want to recognize the memoriam. There have been several individuals who have had careers, either voluntary or professional, long careers that have helped Belmont. We know that we depend on people who really, some, as I say, volunteers, some employed by the town, who are devoted. And we've passed away 5 individuals in the past months. And I'd like to recognize them: Mark Clark, Dave Hawkins, Joe Malone, Jocelyn Record, and Marty Cohen. And I would ask for a moment of silence in their memory. Thank you. We now turn to our testing of devices to make sure that they are working. So when we vote, we have the proper count. So at this point, if you would vote 1, 2, or 3, and we'll test the devices. So go ahead. Thank you. All right, why don't we show the totals, close the polls and show the total at this point. So is there anybody who pressed their device and it didn't show that they voted? We'll run this is the summary of the voting that we do each time for new town meeting members. And just make sure your name is there and had the proper response.
So this is Ellen Cushman, the town clerk. We see three people who have their hands up. See Kate Bowers, Brian Brady, and Jess Hausman. I wonder if you'd be kind enough, and Azra Nelson, please make sure that you all are calling tech support so that the tech team can help you out. The numbers were distributed Sunday the 1st at 12:15 p.m.
While they're working on that, we will continue with the town meeting. The next item of business is the oath for the new and re-elected town meeting members. I would call on Ellen Cushman for that.
Thank you, Mike. If you would listen along with me, and then after, if you accept the oath, if you would push yes on your Turning Point device when the voting opens. Do you solemnly affirm that you will uphold the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and bylaws of the town of Belmont, and impartially perform the duties as a town meeting member, a position to which you have been duly elected, keeping uppermost in your mind what is best for Belmont and its inhabitants? If we could have the voting slide up, please. And voting is open.
Just another few seconds and we'll. All right. Thank you very much. For those who weren't able to attend tonight, the oath will be administered on Wednesday night. And again, congratulations to all of the new town meeting members and to those who were reelected. We really appreciate your commitment to Belmont's democracy. The next item of business is the other end of the spectrum, namely those long-serving town meeting members who are no longer part of town meeting. And what we've had a practice over the past several years to recognize those town meeting members who had served at least 10 years. In person, these individuals, some of them would come to the town meeting and they would stand up and be recognized, but I will read their names. 10 years served, Gretchen McLean and Carnegie Osayan. 12 years, Virginia Jordan, Marianne Kasanjian, John O'Connor, Bob Sarno. 13 years, Kevin Brosnan, Tony Ferranti. 14 years, Julia Corain. 15 years, Ann Goldenberg. 16 years, Deb Lockett. 18 years, Ann Rittenberg and Susan Titus. Now we're getting in the stratosphere. 20 years, Kathleen Baskin, Chris Cokum, 27 years, Scott Stratford, also serving a long time on the school committee, 27 years, Donald Mercier, 35 years, and amazing Sue Pugh, 45 years. So congratulations and thanks to all of those individuals who have served the town of Belmont so well for so long. Now I will make a few preliminary remarks before we turn to the business of town meeting. The first item of business is always to admit to the floor of town meeting those individuals who are not town meeting members. So I'll read the list. Town administrator, department heads and staff, town clerk staff, town council George Hall, the warrant committee, capital budget committee, long-term capital planning committee, superintendent of schools, the school committee and staff, the planning board, the historic district commission, the bylaw review committee, the energy committee, Ferris Gray, the retirement board, and the board of library trustees. Now, are there any individuals or groups that I have omitted from that list? There'll be opportunities to admit others to the floor with future business, of course. All right, we will continue. I'll review some of the procedures of the town meeting before us. The way we've laid out the nights, it appears that we will be meeting three nights at segment A here in May, today, tonight, Wednesday night, and next Monday night. The meetings, as you know, will begin at 6:30 and run to about 10 o'clock. In terms of speaking, and Ellen Cushman will go over this in more detail shortly, but you will raise, if you want to speak about a motion before town meeting, you raise your virtual hand. When you are recognized, you will get in line, a virtual line. When you're recognized by the moderator, state your name and precinct. And as you know from my email, we have a limit of 3 minutes and 2 questions for town meeting members. The thought on that, and there were several people, many people who asked me, suggested this, was that we were terminating debate and many people were still in line. Frankly, town meeting has become much more engaged in recent years, and I think that's a good thing. But the reality is, with more people wanting to speak, it's probably important to limit that to a reasonable time. And my experience is 3 minutes is adequate time, plenty of time to make a strong argument on behalf of your position on a given motion. All comments and questions should come through the moderator. That's in order for us to maintain some kind of decorum. And very important, keep comments within the scope of the motion. Now, this is a gray area as to whether comments are always within the scope, and different people in town meeting have different views of that. That's really my job to police. What I do is if I feel somebody's moving beyond the scope, I'll wait a few seconds, let them continue to talk, and see if they bring it back to within the scope of the motion. If not, I interrupt them and ask them to come back to the scope. But in this Zoom meeting in the last year or two, one of the things that's happened is a number of individuals have raised a point of order, so to speak, when they thought somebody was moving beyond the scope. That ended up actually slowing down town meeting. So I would ask your indulgence and leave it to me to monitor the scope and to bring a speaker back within if he or she is moving beyond the scope. On amendments, as you know, amendments, substantive amendments need to be filed 3 business days before town meeting. In the articles we'll consider tonight, there are no amendments. There are 3 amendments to Article 3, and that will come before town meeting on Wednesday evening. So only simple, non-substantive amendments are accepted from the floor. And that's been a long time practice of Belmont town meeting. Any motion to amend must be made before speaking to it. So for new town meeting members, if you go to the microphone and make some sort of a motion, please make the motion and then I will say, ask you to speak to it. The electronic roll call voting, as you know, is through Turning Point for most motions. But I will ask for unanimous consent for routine articles, especially those like on the Article 1 reports. So I will, as you see, ask for unanimous consent on those articles, and that will speed town meeting. Finally, you've heard those who have been part of town meeting have heard me say this before, and it was in my email to town meeting members. It's critical that we keep our discourse civil and respectful. The whole basis of democracy is an understanding of the differences and different opinions and reaching compromise or a majority vote. And that is a healthy thing, to have a healthy debate. Passion is fine, but let's keep it civil, and I will not allow individuals to attack or make disparaging comments of other individuals. So I thank you for that. Finally, then I will turn to our town treasurer for a reading of the warrant and elaborating on some of these details. And then we'll turn to town meeting itself.
Thank you, Mike. Pursuant to the warrant for the annual town meeting to be held on May 2nd, 2022, I, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk, do hereby certify that I gave notice of said meeting by posting an attested copy of the warrant and the moderator letter to the Select Board requesting the town meeting be held by remote participation on the Town Clerk's official bulletin board in the Town Hall, on the town website, and at least 5 other places in town 14 days before the date of this meeting, in accordance with Chapter 39, Section 10 of the General Laws and Section 30-110A of the General Bylaws of the Town of Belmont. Furthermore, I do hereby certify that I gave notice of the annual town meeting of May 2nd, 2022, by causing a copy of the warrant and the moderator letter to the Select Board requesting the town meeting be held by remote participation to be sent to the town meeting members at least 7 days before the date of this meeting, and by causing copies of the warrant to be made available at the public library in the town clerk's office and on the town website, all in accordance with Section 30-110B of the General Bylaws of the Town of Belmont and the Representative Town Meeting Acts of 1926 as amended. Mr. Moderator, would you like me to go through the procedures for town meeting members at this time?
Yes, please.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Belmont's annual town meeting. Moderator Michael Widmer has asked me to review a few key points regarding the technology in use for tonight's remote access virtual town meeting. By now, it should be somewhat familiar to continuing town meeting members, but we do have quite a few newly elected members and participants, and we appreciate your patience as I outline a few main points. Town meeting members, presenters, and some town employees are the only people who are in the Zoom webinar. Members of the public are welcome to watch on www.belmontmedia.org or on community access television, cable channel 28 on Verizon and channel 8 on Comcast. This town meeting is being televised on Belmont Media. For town meeting members voting at home who are watching the cable television broadcast, there will be a slight delay in what you see on television from the live event, but your turning point will open at the exact same time as everyone else. We will monitor that delay, but we ask you to vote as soon as the moderator opens voting so you don't miss out. We're happy to report that every single one of our town meeting members has set up their Turning Point electronic voting accounts. Turning Point is the only way to be given attendance credit and to vote routinely tonight. Town meeting members needing technical support during the town meeting should call the technology team at the phone numbers I provided in my email sent yesterday, Sunday, May 1st at 12:13 p.m. We ask all town meeting members to be careful to vote only after the moderator has declared that the polling is open. And then please vote as soon as you can. The moderator will give a fair warning when the polling is about to close. In the event a town meeting member cannot get their Turning Point account to record their vote, the town meeting member should immediately utilize the emergency vote team, which is standing by at the telephone numbers also provided to you in my email yesterday, Sunday, May 1st at 12:13 p.m. Town meeting members will not be able to share their video tonight. Everyone will be on mute whenever not actively speaking to town meeting to avoid background noise distractions. Town meeting members who want to speak must raise their hand by clicking the raise hand icon in the bottom Zoom toolbar to be recognized by the moderator, as Michael said. He will recognize people to speak in the order in which their hands were raised, which is one of the benefits of using webinar. When the moderator invites you to speak by name, he'll call on you to speak. Please unmute yourself. A microphone appears at the bottom left. Identify yourself as our protocol by name and precinct, just as you would if you were at the microphone at town meeting. If you are only dialed into Zoom using the telephone number and no video, please press *9 to raise your hand to be recognized, and you'll join the line of members waiting to speak. Town meeting members who wish to make a point of order, as Michael mentioned, should use the Q&A tool, also located on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom, by typing the words "point of order" only. A staff person will inform the moderator immediately that you have a point of order. The moderator will then call upon you to speak and your audio will be enabled. We caution you that if the moderator is already dealing with a point of order, which has been made by another town meeting member, we will ask you to listen to the outcome of that before breaking in with another point of order request. If you do not have a microphone on your computer, please use that Q&A tool on the bottom Zoom toolbar. Type your full name, your precinct, and your comment or your question. And again, a member of the town meeting Q&A team will let you know the name of the Q&A team member who will be acting as your proxy to read your question. Listen for the moderator to recognize that person who will, on your behalf, read your question or comment exactly as you have typed it. Finally, if the moderator asks for unanimous consent and you choose not to give it, you must immediately use the raise hand function or the Q&A function to get the immediate attention of the moderator. We all will be watching for raised hands during that time period. If we see any, the moderator will, instead of unanimous consent, then call for an electronic vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. I need to make an apology. It turns out in the people I recognize in the memoriam that it was not Jocelyn Record who passed away, but her husband, Chris Moore. So I apologize to Jocelyn, and I apologize to town meeting members for that mistake. We'll now have a preliminary motion. Moved that the town meeting will meet and act on all matters on the warrant for this annual town meeting by means of the video and audio conferencing and voting technologies described in the moderator's March 21, 2022 letter to the select board posted with the warrant. This is a motion that is required by the legislation that allows us to have a virtual meeting. And so we need to vote on this at the beginning of each town meeting, each session of town meeting, in order to continue to have a virtual meeting. So at this point, Those who support this motion would vote yes. Those opposed, no, or abstain. So the polls are open, and please vote. Few more seconds, then we'll show the tally.
Working? We're good.
All right, let's close the polls and show the tally. So the final vote is 224 in favor, 6 opposed, and 2 abstentions. So obviously, we have the support to continue town meeting as through Zoom. We'll read a couple more votes, Town Clerk.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman with tonight's first emergency votes on the preliminary motion. Brian Brady of Precinct 8 votes yes. Karen Bormaki and Herosian, Precinct 2 votes yes. And a late breaking one. Emily Peterson, Precinct 1 votes yes.
So we will add 3 yes votes to the total. The final tally is 227 votes yes, 6 no, and 2 abstention. But Ellen, do we have some more votes?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, it looks like people are just settling in. Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk, again, emergency votes for the preliminary motion for remote access. Darren Muction, Precinct 2 votes yes, and Lisa O'Terry, Precinct 3 votes yes.
So the final tally then is 229 voting in favor, 6 opposed, and 2 abstention. So thank you. We now turn to the order of the articles. So tonight, we will hear Articles 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. If we have time, we'll do 9. And on Wednesday night, we'll either complete action on 9, if we haven't, 10 and 3. And that next Monday night, we will do Articles 11 and 12. So those are roughly the 3 nights, but they will take place in this order. And then Articles 8 and 13 to 22 will be part of Segment B beginning in June, Wednesday, June 1st. So now we'll continue. So now we turn to the reports. Article 1 motion. move that the annual report be accepted and that the written and video reports to town meeting posted on the town's webpage be accepted and made a part of the record of this town meeting. And I would ask for unanimous consent for this motion. If anybody has an objection, please raise your hand. Seeing none, we will accept that that has been passed unanimously.
Hand just went up.
Oh, excuse me. Hand has gone up.
Took it down.
I don't see the hand on my yes.
You took it down.
All right.
You just put it back up. Stephen Terrence.
Mr. Cairns, did you have a comment?
Everything since I started this.
Mr. Cairns, we can hear you. Right?
Yeah, I'm waiting for somebody to call me back for tech support. I've been trying to vote.
Steve, we do have an emergency. This is Ellen. You do have an emergency vote that came in for you on the last one. It just wasn't read out loud. Tech support is supporting 300 people, and I'm sorry, but we're all just have to hang in there and continue to emergency vote until it's solved. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cairns. We'll continue, and under Article 1, we have one report tonight. On COVID, an update from Wes Chin, who's the director of the health department, on COVID. Wes?
Hello, Mr. Moderator, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Wes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Moderator. My name is Wesley Chin, Director of the Belmont Health Department. Tonight, I'm here to give a COVID update to town meeting. So over the next few minutes, I plan to provide you with an overview on how the virus has impacted Belmont since we last gathered for this meeting in May of 2021. And at the end of this update, I will also provide you with some information on the current state of COVID in Belmont. However, before beginning, I want to take a moment to again publicly recognize the challenges that we have all faced as a community over the last 27 months of the pandemic. Across the board, it hasn't been an easy time for any members of our community. COVID has and will continue to find ways to frustrate us as we move forward. But we have certainly learned a lot over the last 2 years on how we can mitigate some of the disruptions. So just as a reminder, I wanted to throw in there that as we look to the future, our Board of Health and members of the town would like to encourage people to continue to be compassionate, understanding, and to be patient with all of our residents as we work through the pandemic. So in terms of the past year, Belmont residents have collectively worked hard to protect themselves, their loved ones, and their neighbors from the virus. So for example, the Select Board and the Board of Health worked together at the end of last summer to reintroduce the indoor mask mandate just before the start of the school year. In review of our local vaccine data, Belmont sits in a good position. Currently, 84% of age-eligible Belmont residents have received at least the initial doses of the COVID vaccine. And encouragingly, since the approval of boosters last fall, 57% of our residents have received these boosters. Additionally, our residents have made good use of the resources that the town has made available to the public in an effort to minimize the impact of COVID in the community. So some examples of efforts that the town has taken on since November of 2021 include the sponsorship of 15 vaccine clinics, at which over 1,800 residents have received either boosters or initial doses of COVID vaccine. 1,100 residents have participated in 6 town-sponsored PCR testing clinics that were strategically timed for COVID testing following various holidays and school vacation periods. 1,700 rapid tests were purchased by the town and initially made available to some of the most vulnerable members of our residents during the Omicron surge earlier this year. And in terms of the work of our local contact tracers, over the past year, they've made calls to over 2,600 residents and their accompanying close contacts. Those are some of the highlights, but I think it's worth also mentioning that all was not cheerful, as we did lose some members of the community to COVID over the past year. We did lose 4 members. So that's something that stings and is something that is preventable as we move forward. So as we look to the present, Belmont is currently in the midst of an increase in cases related to the BA.2 variant of Omicron. We've seen an category. So in April, the month that just ended, there were 304 total PCR confirmed cases in comparison to 107 in March. Average age of these cases remains in the mid-30s. Can also share with you regarding these cases, 84% are fully vaccinated individuals. So that means people that have received at least the first 2 doses. Of the 84%, 68% were boosted. I think it's worth sharing anecdotally that it seems now that there are less asymptomatic positive cases. So that means we're seeing more people with symptoms that do range from mild to moderate. Hospitalizations for Belmont residents, we are currently unaware of any, so that's good news. So the other thing worth noting with respect to these numbers is that these are lab confirmed cases. So this doesn't take into account the at-home rapid tests people may be taking, which are not required to be reported to the state or to our local health department. So just a few reminders as we work through this current uptick in cases. While there isn't a local mask mandate in place, we just want to remind everybody that Belmont continues to be a mask-friendly community, and we just ask for people to be respectful of people's preferences when it comes to masking. Additionally, with the advent of allergy season, some of the symptoms can be confusing and confounding. So if you have any new symptoms that emerge, we strongly encourage you to at least take an at-home test. Our health department here is continuing to monitor trends locally and regionally on a daily basis. And if we notice any concerning patterns, we'll be sure to share that with the public. And we just want to encourage people again to adopt a multi-pronged approach to protecting themselves from COVID. So that includes getting a vaccination, getting a booster when appropriate, masking when in close proximity to others outside of your home for long periods of time, getting a test if you're symptomatic, and staying home when you're ill. The other thing worth noting is the state has pretty much wound down its contact tracing program. So it's really important that if you have symptoms, if you test positive, to be sure to contact anybody you'd had close contact with within 48 hours of developing symptoms. And then, Mr. Moderator, just finally, a word of thank you to the continued hard work and support of my many dedicated colleagues here in Town Hall. Everyone has had a role to play in protecting the health of our residents, from officials in the school department, police, fire, facilities, recreation, DPW, town clerk, HR, IT, and the Council on Aging. But in particular, I want to thank the members of my Board of Health, the Select Board, and our town administrator, who have all been very supportive of our efforts throughout the pandemic. Without their help, we wouldn't be able to make resources available to the community, such as vaccine clinics and testing. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to you and thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Wes, very much.
Mr. Moderator, this is Ellen O'Brien Cushman with a quick announcement for those people who are still struggling to get into their Turning Point accounts. I'm understanding from both tech team and the Q&A team that some people are still struggling. And the suggestion is that people are appearing to use their telephones or smartphones and they're just pushing to open the app, but instead, after opening the app, they must sign in. And it'll say, welcome Ellen, or something like that. You need your email and your password. If you have not done that, it will not record on town meeting. So give that another try. I hope we're a little better now.
Thank you. And I want to reiterate what Wes said. This has been an enormous cooperative effort in the town of Belmont in dealing with this long pandemic. So thank you to everyone. We'll now take Article 1. We'll lay it on the table. Move that Article 1 be laid on the table. And I will ask for unanimous consent for this motion. For the new town meeting members, this simply means that the reports under Article 1 tonight are over and we'll move on with business. So is there unanimous consent for this? It appears so. So this motion is adopted unanimously. We'll now go to Article 2. And Mr. Palillo will read this, Chair of the Select Board, will read this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. Mark Palillo, Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. If I might just moderate, just take a moment to also thank Wes Chin and his leadership and the Health Department, the Board of Health, all of the town and school employees that worked so hard under trying conditions over the past 2 years. On behalf of the Select Board, we appreciate your efforts, we appreciate your guidance, and we appreciate the fact that you're committed to moving this town forward. So thank you for that. Move that the Select Board be and hereby is authorized to bring and defend actions for and against the town, to submit any such claims to arbitration and to enter into settlement on account of the same in behalf of the town, as and when they deem it for the best interest of the town. To do so, said power shall be vested solely in the Select Board. Mr. Moderator, this is a standard. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Marty. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the vote of the Select Board. Sorry.
Mr. Moderator, Mark Palillo, Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. The Select Board unanimously recommends favorable action.
For new town meeting members, this is a routine article motion that we present each year. Is there any discussion? Please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we'll go to a vote on this motion. You can open the polls. If you favor this motion, vote yes. If you oppose it, vote no. Two people have raised their hands, so we'll keep the voting open if we can, but Carol Williams, did you raise your hand? Go ahead, Carol.
No, I'm all set.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And then Catherine Amina, did you raise your hand?
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So let's close the polls here and show the tally for motion under Article 2. We'll get some added. Is there another raised hand? Emily Peterson, is your hand raised?
Sorry, I just wanted to point out that I was one of the many with the turning point problem. And when I used the app, I had to download the app to my phone. It worked. So if there's other people that were having trouble, do that. Sorry, just wanted to try to help.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Do we have supplementary votes, Ellen?
Mr. Moderator, we do. Ellen O'Brien, Cushman Town Clerk with emergency votes on Article 2. Brian Brady, Precinct 8 votes yes. Darren Muckshin, Precinct 2 votes yes. And Karen Hirosian, Precinct 2 votes yes. And I have another one. I heard a bell coming in.
So we can.
And this is the and Richard Candy, Nick Candy at 7, Precinct 7, yes.
At this point, we have 248 in favor, 1 opposed, and 3 abstentions. So I don't think we need to scroll the vote in this case, so let's move on. We now turn to Article 4, amending the general bylaw, demolition delay. Mr. Epstein will read the motion and we'll hear, and I'll get a couple of reports from the committees, and then we'll hear a presentation from Lisa Harrington, who's co-chair of the Historic District Commission. Mr. Epstein.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Roy Epstein, member of the Select Board and Town Meeting member from Precinct 6. Moved that the town vote to amend paragraph 60-320 of the town's general bylaws titled Demolition Delay Bylaw as printed in the warrant for this town meeting.
And the vote of the Select Board, Mr. Epstein?
The Select Board voted unanimously to support 3-0.
Great, thank you. And Mr. McGaugh for the Bylaw Review Committee?
Okay. Bob McGraw, Vice Chair of the Bylaw Review Committee. The Bylaw Review Committee reviewed the proposed article, and I report to you that the committee unanimously approved it as to form, placement, and consistency with existing provisions of the general bylaws, but reserves the right to modify its numbering as necessary to conform it to the style of the general bylaws.
Thank you, Mr. McGaugh. We now turn to the presentation by Lisa Harrington. Ms. Harrington, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lisa Harrington, Chair, I'm actually Chair of the Historic District Commission. I'd like to give you a very brief summary of the history of the demo delay bylaw and what it does and doesn't do for those not familiar with the bylaw. And we can go on to the next screen. demolition delay bylaw is a preservation tool for saving the town's most significant buildings and structures that are not located in one of the town's local historic districts. The bylaw only applies to those buildings that are on the significant buildings list. The list encompasses the most significant buildings that are otherwise unprotected that contribute to the town's character. The significant buildings list was developed utilizing data from a historic resources survey, which was conducted by a historic preservation consultant and the HDC. The resources survey was completed in 2016, which began with over 600 properties, 205 of which were inventoried, and ultimately 182 were identified by the HDC as either being associated with historically significant people or events or outstanding representations of a given architectural style. The current list includes 181 buildings and structures. Next slide. So the bylaw is a tool to discourage the destruction of Belmont's cultural resources, but it does not prohibit demolition. The bylaw allows the Historic District Commission to review applications for demolition and to impose a delay period as a means to encourage the owner to consider alternatives. The bylaw does not prevent maintenance or renovations to buildings on the list, nor does it trigger any additional review by the HDC. So we can go on to the next slide. So the Historic District Commission is seeking to renew Belmont's existing demolition delay bylaw and make it permanent. Town meeting approved Belmont's demolition delay bylaw in 2014, and the original bylaw expired after 3 years. So the second version was approved at town meeting for 5 years back in 2017, and it expires at the end of this year. So we propose to renew the current bylaw with 3 minor changes. The first one is to remove the expiration clause to make the law permanent. 2 is to update the definition of significant buildings list to the current version, as there were 2 properties that were originally on the list, which were removed through the appeals process since the 2017 version came out and the bylaw was enacted. There was 1 property that was removed entirely, and the other had a portion of the building removed from the list. And the last portion is about removing the section about appeals. The appeals process was established for properties newly added to the list in 2017, and no new properties have been added to the list. And the proposed bylaw does not include a process in which we can add properties. So the reason we're done this third portion of it is because the appeals process from the 2017 bylaw is no longer valid or necessary. So we believe the changes are minor, and the approval of making the demo delay bylaw permanent will continue as a tool in helping to maintain the character of Belmont.
Thank you,
So
Ms. Oh, sorry.
We can quickly go. I have one more quick slide. I just wanted to show, just to give an overview that we had 101, 81 that were on the list, how many cases that were reviewed, and at the very bottom, 0 properties were demolished. So, we'll never know how many properties could have potentially been demolished, but so we don't know how effective the tool really is, but clearly something's working because, we've been in good shape since this bylaw has been enacted. And then I guess we can just leave it at the last slide. So that's it. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Harrington. Now that we've had the presentation, we're open for discussion. So please raise your virtual hand. Mr. Catola?
Mr. Moderator, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Jason Catola, town meeting member, precinct 3. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I'll provide 3 reasons. First, I ask you to imagine a case where a collection of neighbors, or my neighbors, decides that there is some aspect of your property that we find valuable, and we decide that, and you want to make some modification to your property. I submit that many of us would find that it's patently unfair for people to impose such a cost on the person who wants to make a modification to their property. Secondly, this additional cost is imposed without any kind of compensation for the delay. And thirdly, this much of the town's land, which we know is limited, is now put to its most productive use, and housing principally is land can't be put to its most productive use. Why it's not being put to that. So for these three reasons, I urge you to vote against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Catola. Steve Pinkerton.
Steve Pinkerton, town meeting member, precinct 7, and chairman of the planning board. Mr. Moderator, the planning board unanimously recommends favorable action. We don't see this as an impediment to development in this town.
Thank you. Vincent Stanton.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Vincent Stanton, town meeting member, precinct 3. I strongly support this bylaw. I would point out that the 4 buildings that we're looking at were all destroyed before we had the protection of of this kind of measure, the partial protection, the 6-month delay. The house on the upper left was built in 1760. May have been used on the Underground Railroad. The church in the upper right was the architect was Hammett Billings, who was widely known as the dean of Boston architects in the second half of the 19th century. I could go on, but the point is these were real treasures that, in the case of the Waverly Church, for example, defined in many ways the look of Waverly Square. That spire echoes the spire across the street of the former Waverly Fire Station, now converted into a condominium. So that's number one. We really lost a lot of Belmont's architectural heritage before we had this bylaw. Number two, Mr. Catola posited a hypothetical that I don't think could come about. In other words, he hypothesized that his neighbors would see his house as architecturally significant, or they wanted to keep some piece of it. That's not how houses get on the protected list. It's through a process administered by the Historic District Commission that they get on that list. And as the chair of the District Commission pointed out, there have actually been no houses added since the last time we passed this bylaw. So that's basically a non-starter. That scenario would not occur. The final point that I would make is that many surrounding towns seem to do just fine with significantly more restrictive demolition delay bylaws to protect, for example, the architectural heritage of Lexington. I don't know the details, but I'm sure the chair of the Historic District Commission could tell us the towns that have a 1-year delay or whatever. So I think this is a measure that we've had experience with that has worked. Although, as the chair points out, it's we don't have a control experiment other than these 4 pictures and many other buildings like them. But anyway, I strongly encourage town meeting to pass this measure.
Thank you. Next speaker is Heather Ivester.
Good evening. I just was wondering if we do have a list available of the publicly owned buildings that may be on this? Or are they all privately owned properties?
Ms. Harrington?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering if any of the properties listed are publicly owned or they're all privately owned that are on this list?
Yes, I got the question, so I'm turning to Lisa Harrington for a response.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lisa Harrington, Chair, Historic District Commission. The properties that are on the list are not town-owned buildings. They are private. The town-owned buildings that are within the historic districts are not subject to the demolition delay bylaw. That doesn't apply. It's only buildings that are the ones that are on the list. And I just wanted to clarify as well that because this is a list that is not added to, there is no, if the list were ever to be expanded or modified, it would have to go through town meeting again for a vote to add or remove anything from the list. There is the possibility of removing a building from the list if at some point a property is deemed not significant. There is no, houses can be modified, they can be added on to. It's only when there's substantial demolition that the flag goes up, and we work with an owner to explore other options rather than demolition. But the period is I just want to clarify from one of the previous speakers. It's a 12-month delay, not a 6-month delay. And several of the towns around us have much more, as you said, have much more stringent demolition delay bylaws. For example, Winchester, I believe if any building, any property in Winchester that is over 50 years old, no matter whether it's significant or not, has to go through the process of being vetted through the demolition delay bylaw. Belmont has a very concise list of buildings. And if you think about it, we went through a lot of trouble just to make this particular list. And the buildings that are on the list, 182, that's about less than 2% of properties in town. So it's not town-wide where we're implementing this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, for the record, this is Ellen O'Brien Cushman. The last speaker who had the question was Heather Ivester for the clerk reporter. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I forgot to remind her to state her name and precinct. Judith Sarno, you're next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Judith Ananian Sarno, Precinct 3. And I'm speaking to my fellow town meeting members and asking you, I am strongly urging you to vote yes, number one, strongly supporting this article. And thank you, Vince, my colleague in Precinct 3, for explaining some of the history. All you have to do is look at the church in the top right photo. There was no delay. That church pulled a permit and was demolished. So again, thank you, and please vote yes.
Thank you, Judith. Corinne Olmsted, you are next.
Corinne McHugh Olmsted, Precinct 1. Lisa mentioned that there was, if additional buildings were to be added to the list of significant buildings, that would have to go to town meeting for a vote. I guess my question is just a clarification. If town meeting would be voting on adding buildings or changing the bylaw, because then I guess would an appeal procedure need to be put back in?
Ms. Harrington?
I was muted again. So for both of those questions, yes to both of them. If we were to add to the list, it would have to go back to town meeting, and yes, we would have to amend the bylaw to include an addition. But at this point, there is no plan to adding to the list.
Thank you. And for the record, that was Lisa Harrington. Ellen?
Mr. Moderator, it's Ellen O'Brien Cushman again. I haven't really been doing my job, and I have been asked to provide the number of people in line to speak. There are two people in line to speak, and they are Jason Catola, but I believe he's already spoken on this motion, and Cosmo Macero, who has not.
And thank you. And for the information of town meeting members, our rules are that no one has an opportunity, a right, to speak a second time until everybody who wants to speak a first time has spoken. So we'll come back to Mr. Catola after now there's suddenly several more people in line. So we'll go through that. Cosmo Macero, you're next, Cosmo.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cosmo Macero, Precinct 5. I understand this is merely a renewal of this bylaw. It's existed, and a number of people have spoken to it favorably. I do think it is flawed in that it does not provide the same process for town-owned buildings, for municipal buildings. In some cases, the biggest threat to preservation is the municipality of Belmont itself. So I think the bylaw is flawed, and I think Mr. Catola raises some good points. This does strike me as a potential tool or impediment to development in Belmont, positive development potentially, which the town needs in terms of expanding its tax base. But I look forward to listening to other comments. Nonetheless, and I think town meeting member Heather Ivester made this point also, that the fact that it does not apply to town buildings seems to be an open question, unless the separate process for related to town-owned buildings could be better explained. Thank you.
Thank you. Next in line is Paul Joy.
Mr. Moderator, I move the question.
Mr. Joy has moved the question for new town meeting members. That is a motion to terminate debate. And because the debate, because there is no further discussion of a motion, such a motion, this requires a 2/3 vote. And I'll turn to Ellen first before we vote.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, in addition to Jason Catola, there are 4 other members who are waiting to speak on this motion.
Right, thank you. So the question has been moved, so we are going to vote whether to terminate debate or not. If you wish to terminate debate, vote yes. If you wish the debate to continue, vote no. If this is passed by a 2/3 majority, we'll go directly to a vote on the motion. If it's defeated, then we will continue our discussion. So let's open the polls on the motion to terminate debate under Article 4. We'll close the polls in a few seconds here. All right, let's close the voting, show the tally. Well, at this point, 165 in favor, 79 opposed. This is obviously it's slightly over 2/3, but we should wait for the other votes because they might possibly change the outcome. Go ahead, Al.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk, with the terminate debate on Article 4, emergency votes. We have Steve Kerens, Precinct 8, voted yes. Alex Corbett, Precinct 8, voted yes. And I understand I hear a bell ringing, so I will join you again.
So at this point, it's 167 yes, 79 no. It's slightly more than 2/3. We'll wait for the other votes, other emergency votes. Go ahead, Ellen.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman again, Article 4, terminate debate. Derek Mutchin votes no. And we still have one more person, as I understand it, coming forth. They're walking across the
We'll
room.
wait one more minute. Well, if there's only one more, we'll wait, but with 167 yes, 80 no, this just exceeds the 2/3 hurdle. So debate is terminated under Article 4. We will take one more vote to get the final yes, and let's show the tally here. Thank you. Go ahead, Ellen.
Here are the final votes. Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Article 4 to terminate debate. Lisa O'Terry votes yes, and Richard Candy, Precinct 7, votes yes.
So we have two more yeses. Once we scroll through here, I'll declare the final vote. All right, if we show the tally again, please. So the final tally is 169 in favor of terminating debate, 80 opposed. So this narrowly passes. So now we'll go immediately to a vote on the main motion under Article 4. So we're voting on the motion as read by Mr. Epstein and presented by Ms. Harrington. So the polls are open. If you favor the motion, vote yes. If you oppose it, vote no. Give a few more seconds. All right, let's close the polls, show the tally. So the vote is 217 in favor, 31 opposed, 1 abstention. Ellen, you have at least 1 or 2.
I do. Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk, Article 4. Darren Muction votes yes from Precinct 2.
So I don't hear any other votes. So at this, the final tally then is 218 in favor, 31 opposed, and 1 abstention. So we'll show the scroll here.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman again on Article 4. Nick Candy, Precinct 7 voted yes.
So we'll add 1 more to the yes total. All right, so final total then. Ellen, how many did we have? How many did we have additionally? 3 now? Well, 1 more here. We'll close this in a second.
Mr. Moderator, total, we have a total of 4 emergency votes, which you have decided to accept. The new ones on Article 4, Carol Williams, Precinct 3 voted yes, and Roy Epstein, Precinct 6 voted yes. So there are a total of 4 yes votes to be added.
Okay, so the final tally for the record, 221 yes, 31 opposed, 1 abstention. So thank you. So now we move on to Article 5, and I'll introduce the town clerk who had presented this to town meeting. So Ms. Cushman, would you read the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk and Town Meeting Member at Large. Let's see, moved that the town vote to amend Section 40-100 of the general bylaws of the town titled Membership of Town Committees as printed in the warrant for this town meeting, including the notes and errata that were distributed on April 27, 2022.
Thank you. Let's now turn to the Select Board Chair, Mr. Palillo, for a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mark Palillo, Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. The Select Board unanimously recommends favorable action.
Thank you. And the Bylaw Review Committee, Mr. McGaugh.
Bob McGaugh, Vice Chair of the Bylaw Review Committee. The Bylaw Review Committee reviewed the proposed article, and I report to you that the committee unanimously approved it as to form, placement, and consistency with existing provisions of the general bylaws, but reserves the right to modify its numbering as necessary to conform it to the style of the general bylaws.
Thank you, Mr. McGaugh. Now I will turn back to Ms. Cushman, who will explain this motion. Ms. Cushman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk and Town Meeting Member at Large. We have a lot to accomplish tonight, so I hope to be extremely brief. On the left side of the slide that I'm displaying, you'll see the topics in the current bylaw for our committees, boards, and commissions. And on the right-hand side of the proposal that we'll be voting on shortly. Since our committees are a vital part of our government, most people believe that membership is reserved for Belmont residents, but that restriction is not currently in the bylaws. This proposal requires that members be residents of Belmont, understanding that there are certainly some important exceptions an appointing authority should consider and allow, such as owners of Belmont businesses, parents of Belmont public school students, or employees of the town, for example. Currently, there is but one reason for a member to be removed from a town committee, and that's for missing 3 consecutive meetings of the group. The proposal that I put forth adds 2 more reasons: a member who is no longer a resident of the town, and a member who does not comply with the state's mandatory ethics training requirements. Finally, we've added at the consultation of town council an opportunity to require and notify the committee member of a meeting at which their removal would be discussed, to allow the meeting member, to explain any extenuating circumstances. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We're now open for discussion of the motion under Article 5. So please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Judith Finley.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Judith Finley, Precinct 6. When we are discussing missing 3 consecutive meetings, is there any indication of the time period involved between them? So for example, it could be 3 weeks when somebody, for whatever reason, is out of town, or it could be a period of 6 weeks.
So the current, Judith, this is Ellen O'Brien Cushman again, the town clerk. The current bylaw only says 3 consecutive meetings. I think that's just to reflect that some of our committees meet weekly and others meet over a period of months. And it is up to the chair to notify the appointing authority. So if, for example, there's an extenuating circumstance, the person is traveling or their parent or a child is sick or whatever, I'm sure that the chair would have the right not to report them to the appointing authority.
Mr. Moderator, am I allowed to?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. So it's totally, am I correct that it is totally up to the chair and not, and we are assuming good, it's what I would, I guess, call goodwill, that is the kinds of reasons you have just cited?
I believe so, yes. That certainly is my experience, Judith. Ellen O'Brien Cushman, town clerk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Yes. G, I think I saw your hand. No. Don't see any other hands raised. Yes, there you go, G.
Ji Yun Hong, Precinct 8. Ellen, can you give us a general sense of how many people this change would affect?
Sure. Ellen O'Brien Cushman, town clerk. At the end of the ethics cycle, which happens every 2 years, I give a compliance report to the select board and the school committee and the moderator. And sometimes there probably are about 18 people on those lists. I think this would help to encourage those people to retain their seats. I think that's the number that we're looking at.
If I may ask a follow-up.
Sure.
So are you saying that, for example, the 18, the issue is really that they're not following the ethics guidelines?
No, I'm saying Ellen O'Brien Cushman, town clerk again. I'm actually saying that the law that covers ethics requires that every employee and every volunteer of every committee takes an online mandatory training course and submits a certificate of their completion. That happens on a 2-year cycle. And if people don't do it, there is no way at the moment to have the appointing authority remove those people from the board. And they get many opportunities to comply. So this just gives another tool to our appointing authorities to make considerations about who should be on our government boards. And that's just more information for them to be able to act or choose not to act. It's entirely up to them.
Thank you for that clarification.
Certainly.
I guess I'm assuming that if you are not in compliance with the ethics that's in the training, that you will be removed.
So again, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, that again would be entirely up to the appointing authority. The ethics law is a state law, and that has its own sort of schedule. However, the appointing authority would be acting with full information.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Adriana Poole, you're next.
Adriana Poole, Precinct 1. I apologize, Mr. Moderator. I think it was a mistake. I do not want to speak.
Sure. Thank you, Adriana. Chris Doyle.
Yeah, thank you. Part of my question was just answered by Ellen, but I'm wondering if you could embellish a little bit, which is that if someone is, they've done the training and they're not in compliance, could you just super briefly state what happens? It sounds like we are not allowed to add into our bylaw that they, as an additional element of this, that they could be removed for non-compliance. I assume you considered that. So that's a question. And then just an idea we could give to the League of Women Voters, just like they put attendance in town meeting, maybe they could put in their little summary whether someone is in compliance with the training requirement.
Ellen?
I believe that town council, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, town clerk, sorry, I believe the town council is the appropriate person to answer the question about the state ethics requirement.
Mr. Hall?
Yes, George Hall, Town Council. I understood the distinction between not being in compliance with the requirement of taking the training or in some other way having violated the State Ethics Act. Currently, there are certain board members that can be removed for cause, and a significant violation of the State Ethics Act could be cause for removal. But otherwise, the State Ethics Act is really primarily enforced by the State Ethics Commission. And there isn't a process for removing people from town boards and committees for ethics violations. This bylaw amendment is geared toward the training requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Norma Maserati?
Yes, Norma Maserati, town meeting member, Precinct 5, Bay State Road. Who and how will attendance be enforced on the 3 consecutive meeting criteria?
That's a great question, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, town clerk. All of our meetings have the requirement to have minutes filed, and the open meeting law requires that those minutes be filed with the town clerk within 30 days maximum. So the record speaks for itself. It is the responsibility of the chair and the record keepers to note anybody who is attending and who has been missing meetings. So as a chair of a committee myself, I know that that's one of the things that I look for. I know that most chairs of committees, that's one of the first things that they check.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't see any other hands at this time.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, now I do.
I see Roy Epstein has his hand raised.
Okay, Mr. Epstein. Sorry, I missed you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Roy Epstein, a member of the Select Board and town meeting member from Precinct 6. I'm not sure if Ellen made it clear that this provision for removal by if you miss, or the potential removal if you miss 3 consecutive meetings has been in the bylaws for a long time. And it's merely being restated for purposes of this evening, but it's not new. It's not something that's being proposed de novo. What's new is the component about the ethics training.
Thank you. Ian Lipson?
It's Betsy, I think.
Or is that?
Betsy Lipson. I'll change that on my husband's computer. Town meeting member precinct 6 and co-chair of the Housing Trust. I'm just wondering if the chairs will be notified regularly on the standing of compliance with state ethics training requirements. I don't recall having received that before in regards to members of the trust. And I also wonder if now when we post minutes, you're also going to have a spot for us to update on attendance. I know that that's there at the top of the minutes, but it's not like a running list. So is that going to be a new template?
Thank you, Ellen.
Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk. No, it's not necessarily our intention to take that on, but that might be a good suggestion if you believe that that would be a good tool for chairs. It is one of the responsibilities of the chairs. The Town Clerk's office is not going to begin monitoring for attendance. But the compliance and non-compliance with the state ethics training requirement, we do send that out to those who have not been complying. And we've sent them 3 or 4 different notices, and then all else fails, we send it to the chair of the committee. So if you haven't heard from us, then that meant that your committee was pretty compliant.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any further discussion? Joel Samuels.
Yes. How many persons are now not Belmont residents that we know about on a committee? And what happens in the future if by the time minutes are filed, you find out that a person is not eligible anymore? Does their retroactive vote get erased? In other words, it takes you 3 months to find out, and they voted on something important, and it won or lost by 1 vote. Is the vote then not counted retroactively? Joel Samuels, Precinct 6.
Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk. I think we'll ask for Town Council to answer that one.
Mr. Hall.
George Hall, Town Council. The new amendment would require that the appointing authority declare the office vacant because of the member's failure to maintain the residency. And so there wouldn't be any retroactive taint to some vote made by a person who is no longer a resident. They continue to be lawfully a member of the committee until they're removed or until the office is declared vacant by the appointing authority.
Thank you.
Mr. Samuels did have another question, Ellen.
Yes, the first question, how many, do we know how many people now are on a committee and are not Belmont residents?
Joel, it's Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk. At this time, I believe that we have 2.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next person, Ada Baptista.
Hello, Adam Batista, Precinct 3, town meeting. I'd like to move the question.
Mr. Baptista moves the question. There is nobody waiting in line to speak at this point, but the question has been moved, so let's turn to a motion to terminate debate. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed to terminating debate vote no. This takes 2/3. What we're going to do on the emergency votes is they will be reflected in the record, the official record, but we won't continue to hold up town meeting to wait for those votes. So just wanted people to understand their vote will be recorded. And the polls are, the polls are open. So voting on terminating debate. We'll just do a few more seconds here. All right, let's close the polls and show the tally, please. So the final vote, well, next to final, we'll add officially to those emergency, but at this point it's 238 in favor, 10 opposed. So obviously debate will be terminated. With that, let's turn to the motion under Article 5. And I don't think we need to show the terminating debate call here. Let's just turn directly to the motion under the vote under the motion. So now we're voting on the main motion under Article 5. If you favor that motion, vote yes. If you oppose, vote no or abstain. Polls are go ahead and open the polls. All right, let's show the tally on the main motion under Article 5. So the main motion passes 247 to 1. And there will be some emergency votes to add to that. But why don't we quickly roll through this since there's only one. You can move more quickly, I think, on this vote. All right, so we've now completed action on Article 5. 247 in favor, 1 opposed. And now turn to Article 6. And for that, I'll call on Mr. Dash to read the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board and Town Meeting Member at Large. Article 6, to amend General Bylaw Section 60-325, Stormwater Management and Erosion Control. Moved that the town vote to amend Section 60-325 of the town's general bylaws titled Stormwater Management and Erosion Control as printed in the warrant for this town meeting, including notes and errata distributed to town meeting members April 26, 2022.
And how does the Select Board vote?
Adam Dash again, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. The Select Board unanimously recommends favorable action.
And Mr. McGaugh for the Bylaw Review Committee.
I know everybody knows what I'm going to say, but I'll say it anyway. Bob McGaugh, Vice Chair of the Bylaw Review Committee. The Bylaw Review Committee reviewed the proposed article, and I report to you that the committee unanimously approved it as to form, placement, and consistency with existing provisions of the general bylaws, but reserved the right to modify its numbering as necessary to conform it to the style of the general bylaws.
Thank you, Mr. McGaugh. And Mr. Dash, did you want to say a few words before introducing Mr. Clancy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Again, Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. The purpose of Article 6 is to have our existing stormwater management and erosion control bylaw aligned with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency issued municipal separate storm sewer system permit, which is also known as the MS4 permit. The MS4 permit requires municipalities to codify certain permit requirements in order to put teeth into the enforcement of these items. I'll now turn it over to Town Engineer and Director of Community Development, Glenn Clancy, to explain further. Thank you.
Mr. Clancy.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Adam, thank you for the lead-in. Good evening, town meeting members. The purpose of Article 6 is to amend the Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Bylaw so it aligns with the latest municipal separate storm sewer system permit, also known as the MS4 permit. What the MS4 permit does is it authorizes discharges from Belmont storm sewer system into the waters of the United States. It is a permit that is issued by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Back in 2013, town meeting adopted the original Stormwater Management and Erosion Control Bylaw. At the time, we were focusing a lot on local level issues. And so we were able to create a bylaw that required new construction to meet stormwater management and erosion control requirements. We have provisions that require sewer and stormwater service connections to comply with certain regulations. We knew at the time that the MS4 permit was due for a new iteration. The MS4 permit's been around for many years, at least 20 that I'm aware of. It is a permit that has a 5-year cycle, and we knew that the permit on the horizon, coming sometime beyond 2013, was going to really beef up regulations. And so we tried our best to anticipate what those requirements would be when we had drafted the original bylaw in 2013. The current MS4 permit, which is in effect right now, was issued in July of 2018 and was in effect in July of 2018. And there were provisions in the MS4 permit that we weren't able to cover with our adoption back in 2013. And so, as Adam mentioned, there are requirements that have to be in this bylaw in order for us to be in compliance with the MS4 permit. And so the proposal this evening is to add wording to clarify definitions, add wording to include references to things like total maximum daily load requirements that are specified and enumerated in the general permit issued by EPA and DEP. We add some definitions to align with the permit, and we also added some wording to address pet waste, which in and of itself is not a requirement in the bylaw, but recognizing the proliferation of particularly dog ownership over the last couple of years and the use of the public playgrounds and parks, we want to try to get ahead of the impacts of pet waste on our public properties. Matt. At the League of Women Voters Warrant Night, I was asked a question about, what are sort of the outcomes of having this bylaw in place that was adopted in 2013. And so I put a brief slide together. It's a little bit busy and I apologize for that. But what I wanted to impress upon everyone was the number of permits that we've issued for sewer and storm drain connections since the inception of the bylaw going back to FY14. You can see sanitary sewer connections in particular have been pretty robust over the years. Also wanted to show the actual stormwater management and erosion control permits that we've issued. We started issuing them in January of 2014, and if you run that down the list by fiscal year, you'll see that some years are busier than others. The economy, and I think there was actually a moratorium in place in 17 and 18 that had an effect at that time. But by and large, the permitting issuance has been successful for the town. The bylaw has allowed us to manage stormwater on residential properties. We also at the time created revolving funds that allowed us to accept payments from developers who, because of site conditions, weren't able to install stormwater management systems. And right now, over the years, we've had 3 properties that actually couldn't abide by the bylaw. There's $13,500 sitting in that account. That money is available for us to use on stormwater management type projects. I'm currently on another thing, working on municipal vulnerability preparedness, and eventually there'll be projects that come out of that I can put that money to use. So that's it. That's what I got.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. Now, we're open for discussion. A motion under Article 6. Mr. McGaugh?
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien
Yes.
before you go with Mr.
As a member of the bylaw
Bob,
review committee,
excuse me, 1 minute, Bob, excuse me. Ellen,
Sorry, before you start, just so you know, there are 3 people.
great, thank you. Mr. McGaugh, pardon me, go ahead.
Robert McGaugh, Precinct 1, member of the Bylaw Review Committee. As member of the committee, I had to read through this article. It is very tedious. I have to report to the town meeting that we are lucky to have someone like Glenn Clancy who was willing to put in the time to try to figure out how to conform the Belmont town law to all of the inconsistent and conflicting requirements of EPA and the state DEP. Many of the definitions are archaic. The words don't mean what they seem to mean. Glenn seemed to have a great grip on all of this, and I think we should all be pleased that the Belmont stormwater management article is as straightforward as it possibly could be.
Thank you. Next, Judy Fines.
Judy Fines, Precinct 5, town meeting member. I have both a substantive question and a language question. The substantive question first. Right in the purposes section of the bylaw, we've now got a requirement to remove unauthorized discharges. And while I can see that dog waste is something that you could readily removed, I can think of lots of kinds of unauthorized discharges that can't be easily done. So I'm not sure how to effectuate that requirement. And let me just add my second question, and then I'd love to have an answer from Glenn, who does do very good work on this stuff. The second question that I have, or point I want to make, is about removing the definition of development from the bylaw when it is then referred to about 5 other times. I don't think it's helpful to have taken it out and then to have low impact development and redevelopment, and the word gets reused. So you might want to think about cleaning that up in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Clancy, the 2 questions.
Sure. Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. At first, I cannot let Bob McGaugh's comments pass without acknowledging how grateful I am and how humbled I am to receive accolades from someone of Bob McGaugh's esteem. So I really do deeply appreciate that. Judith, regarding the definition question of development. So that was one of the specific areas where we had to make those changes to be in line with the MS4 permit. We did have a general definition of development. The MS4 permit does break it down to new development, redevelopment, and we were, our hand was forced, so to speak, on having to change the bylaw to recognize the definitions that come out of the MS4 permit. At the end of the day, really, it doesn't change our ability to get what we want or get where we need to go with our desires locally. It really was just a nod to be more in line with the MS4 permit. As far as the purposes section, embedded in the rules and regulations at Mass DEP on the state level, EPA on the local level, there are a lot of standards and guidance on how you get at these illicit discharges and these pollutants that are ultimately affecting our stormwater. They're not necessarily enumerated in a bylaw, but I can assure you that they exist, and the consultants that we work with are all up to speed. I actually, just by coincidence, was in a meeting with an official from EPA this afternoon talking about stormwater issues in Belmont. I can assure you that everyone involved in this program understands what pollutants are and what it takes to identify them and ultimately remove them from our stormwater.
Excuse me, I was mute. Anne-Marie Lambert.
Thank you, Anne-Marie Lambert, now town meeting member of Precinct 2. I rise in support of this motion, but I have two questions. One is, Glenn, I don't think this includes a utility fee, and I wanted you to comment on that. And then I have another question.
Sure. So back in 2013, when we first developed the bylaw, one of the things that we
Glenn,
did
can you
consider.
identify
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. I feel like I'm more easily prompt when I'm standing at a microphone, and I apologize for that. Anne-Marie, we did consider a utility fee back when we developed the bylaw in 2013. We couldn't come to an agreement on how to assess the stormwater fee, whether it was done by impervious area on lots, whether it was done by lot area. There were a lot of variables that we couldn't get our head around at the time. It is something that we intended to come back to. And again, just by coincidence, I had a meeting with Todd Constantino, who is the GIS person in our IT department. I had a meeting with Todd about a month ago now, and we were talking about different things. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was the fact that Todd is actually working on a GIS layer in the town of Belmont that is identifying and calculating impervious area on properties in Belmont. So we may ultimately have the tool that we need to move ahead, but it is something that we need to re-engage, because one of the requirements in the permit is that eventually the town has to identify a funding source to be able to mitigate the issues that we identify. Right now, we're falling back on the Sewer Enterprise Fund as our source. I think it would put the town in a better light if we had a specific stormwater fund that we could point to. And so it's definitely something that is that's on my radar.
Thank you for setting all our
second question.
Yes, thank you, Glenn, for setting all our expectations for the future. My next question is about demolition and whether any of the changes that you're proposing to comply with MS4 change the way in which a demolition followed by development would be considered. In particular, from page 16, it looks like demolition is considered a redevelopment. And on page 20, there are various sort of amounts of land disturbance that are referred to. And if there were demolitions of adjoining properties, like, are they only looked at one at a time? And is there any change, I guess, is my main question, in how a redevelopment that includes a demolition is considered?
So I'm Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development, Mr. Moderator. So Anne-Marie, there was a tweak that we made here that is significant, I think. Our threshold for triggering the bylaw is 2,500 square feet. That was something that was fairly well debated at town meeting in 2013, as I recall. That and the definition of demolition, we really landed on a language that served us well. The MS4 permit has the threshold set at 1 acre. In 2013, we recognized that 1 acre or greater in a town of Belmont, which has lot sizes that can run 5,000 to 6,000 square feet, we weren't going to make a significant change in our quantity and quality of stormwater, setting a threshold at 1 acre. So we set it at 2,500 square feet. We exempted properties beyond 1, 2, and 3 family, but in doing that, we set ourselves up to inadvertently exempt properties that could be, fall under that 1 acre. And so the revision that we've made here, again, in alignment with the MS4 permit, was to throw a reference back in there for the 1 acre, so that on the off chance that you had a 1 acre parcel that wasn't 1, 2, or 3 family, then you were able to capture a project on a property that size. So I think that for most people, you're not going to notice a difference in how we enforce and implement the bylaw. We're sort of hedging our bets here by aligning with the MS4 permit for projects that are on lots that are larger than the 2,500 and actually hit that 1 acre threshold.
Okay, so that tweak is new. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David Webster.
Hi, David Webster, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. First, Glenn, thank you very much for presenting that information about the permits from FY14 to FY21. That's impressive and substantial progress in doing that, along with your work on the illicit connection program. So very good, and I think that Belmont's making progress in that. I am in favor of this revision to the bylaw. One of the reasons is it's a requirement. It's in the permit that Belmont and other towns that had a bylaw bring it up to snuff with the new MS4 permit. And in so doing, it's not only just the definitions, but also, and Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, an important part of this is that it ties in the performance design criteria for new developments and redevelopments as far as pollution, specific pollution goals for those into the Belmont permit, with the provision that the projects under the Belmont's permits comply with those standards. So you can clarify that, but I'm in favor of that, and I think it's a good job, coupled with what you're doing with the illicit connection program.
Thank you. And Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Yes, David, you're right on that. That is absolutely correct.
Barry Gaiman, you're next.
Barry Gaiman, Precinct 5. I just wanted to request Mr. Clancy have some oversight when Gorham Road gets repaved. Houses on Winslow Road and Gorham Road were flooded for about 30 years, from 1950 to 1985, because Gorham Road was not paved correctly. And it's due to be repaved this summer, so I'm just requesting some oversight when that happens.
Mr. Clancy, perhaps you could get back to Mr. Gaiman.
Mr. Moderator, if you can indulge me for about 10 seconds, I can knock this out right now. Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Mr. Gaiman, the process that we use to reconstruct roads allows us to reshape and regrade. We're always keeping an eye on stormwater and runoff when we reconstruct those roads, and I think that we'll be able to solve the problems on Gorham.
Thank you. Ms. Eckert.
Yolanta Eckert, Precinct 3. I just have one question for Glenn. Does the recently approved development at McLean comply with these changes to the bylaw?
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Yes, this new development should comply. The Planning Board site plan approval process has requirements for stormwater management and erosion control. My understanding is that the Planning Board's work comports with the bylaws, so I think the answer to that is yes.
Thank you. I don't see any further hands. So at this point, let's turn to a vote under the motion under Article 6. So please open the polls. And if you support this motion, vote yes. If you oppose, vote no. A few more seconds. All right, let's close the polls and see the tally. So final vote is clear, 254 in favor, no one opposed, and 2 abstentions. And then we'll add the emergency votes to that tally. So now we'll show the, well, you can go through this quickly since they're only, but we're going to take a 5-minute break. The court reporter does an outstanding job, but she needs to take a break after 3 hours, to say the least. So let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and do Article 7. And depending how long that takes, we may be able to do Article 9. Oh, pardon me. Miss Leno, I didn't see it.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand if I did. Sorry about that.
Okay, sure, thank you. All right, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll resume at 8:45. Thank you.
Yes, Julie, it's okay.
All right, we will now resume with Article 7, acceptance of a public way, Oakmont Lane. Call on Select Board Member Roy Epstein to read the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Roy Epstein, member of the Select Board and Town Meeting member from Precinct 6. Moved that the town accept Oakmont Lane as a public way as laid out by the Select Board and as shown on a plan entitled Acceptance Street Plan and Profile, Oakmont Lane, Belmont, Massachusetts, prepared by Glenn R. Clancy, P.E., dated April 4th, 2022, and on file with the town clerk. To authorize the Select Board to acquire by gift such land and easements for the creation, maintenance, and operation of a public way, including but not limited to easements for access, grading, drainage, sloping, construction, and utilities in all or any portions of such way and parcels on such way.
And the vote of the Select Board, Mr. Epstein?
The Select Board voted unanimously to approve the motion.
And did you have any comments, or should we go to Mr. Clancy right away?
I would just comment that from the perspective of the Select Board, we are, as a board, we're actually obligated to support this motion and bring it before town meeting based on the agreement we had with the developers some years ago. But of course, any ultimate decision is the decision of town meetings, not the Select Board.
Thank you. Mr. Clancy.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Waiting for the slide to show up here. So folks, this is a layout of the proposed roadway Oakmont Lane. As you can see, it's an extension off of existing Greensbrook Way. The road itself is owned privately by the developer who purchased the land from the town of Belmont, created 4 buildable lots, and constructed the roadway. Matt. So the purpose of Article 7 is for town meeting to consider accepting Oakmont Lane as a public way. The Board of Survey approved the layout of the road in 2007. So Board of Survey is actually the Select Board sitting as a different board. They're sitting as the Board of Survey. They have the authority to accept new roadways as private ways. Only town meeting can accept a roadway as a public way, which is why this article is before you this evening. The road was part of a town-owned parcel of land that was sold for development in 2015. The original Board of Survey application in 2007 was presented by myself as staff as we were trying to get everything in order so the town could eventually put out an RFP to dispose of the property. We thought it was good practice to include a roadway layout to make it more attractive to developers. The road construction was completed in 2020. It was constructed to meet Board of Survey rules and regulations, which is to say that it was constructed to meet current standards for the construction of a roadway. As Roy alluded to, there was a purchase and sale signed by the town and the developer back in 2015. And in that purchase and sale agreement was a requirement for the Select Board to prepare an article for the town meeting warrant and support the approval of the article at town meeting. Just want to digress here for a second and say that this to me speaks to the value of process. And so I originally presented information on this article at the League of Women Voters warrant night. Some questions were raised that prompted me to have to dig in a little bit deeper and be better prepared for this evening. And in the process of that preparation, I reached out to the developer and was asking a series of questions, trying to get my head around a bunch of issues that I wanted to get straight. And out of that conversation came this recognition from the developer that, hey, this was part of the purchase and sale agreement. Now, I was here back at that time, but I wasn't part of those negotiations. And so I wasn't aware that provision was in the purchase and sale. But lo and behold, I was made aware of it, passed that information on to the Select Board, and we're able to share that with everyone this evening. The residents of Oakmont Lane are aware of the requirement in the purchase and sale, although they were not specifically told that this would be the year that all of this would be happening. But but they were aware that ultimately the developer, with support of the select board, would be presenting something to town meeting. Typically, abutting residents on a road will work with the town on a town meeting article for acceptance of a public way. The town engineer will prepare the plan and advise the select board and town meeting throughout the process. And so I mention this because if you refer to the plan that we showed on the previous slide, you'll see that I stamped it, I signed it as the town engineer. That's protocol. If you go back in history and look at previous plans that were presented to town meeting, it was always the town engineer that prepared those plans, always the town engineer that presented that information. And I think, I obviously don't know the genesis of this, but my gut tells me that, you know, in essence, I'm representing the residents, or the town engineer is representing the residents, because the residents are the abutters to these private ways. And the town engineer as town staff is the one that is conveying the message and the information to the select board and to town meeting. Since the town does not own a private way, the town does not initiate the acceptance process. And so even though as the town engineer, I sign the plan, I stamp the plan, I do not prepare the plan unless there is a proposal or a petition that is put forward to the town. If you consider other private ways in Belmont, for example, I cannot unilaterally present to the select board the acceptance of a private way for public that would ultimately be presented to town meeting. That is not my role. That is not my place. The process has to be initiated by the owners of the private way. And as I mentioned, in this case, it is the developer himself who owns the roadway. Again, to restate, I guess I'm repeating myself here and I apologize, but Oakmont Lane is different from other private ways in Belmont because it is owned by an individual who has sole control over the decision making. That really is important because what we have seen in Belmont historically, and I have been personally a part of these conversations going back for at least the last 15 to 20 years. The abutters on the other private ways in Belmont are having a difficult time reaching consensus agreement on how to move forward with the reconstruction of their roads. And as a result, no action has been taken. The Oakmont Lane, as I said, one individual, one person making the decisions. Very simple process in terms of that person's ability to get this matter before a town meeting. Matt, if you could please. Also want to just talk briefly about private ways in Belmont generally. So the current inventory of private ways in Belmont, there are 19 segments of roads that are private and 51 roads that are entirely private. There are approximately 8 miles of private ways, 19 segments of road. There's these sort of funky circumstances that occur over the years. You have a road that could be accepted public up to a point, and then the last 100 or a couple of 100 feet maybe runs between 2 private properties. It was decided not to make that segment of the road public because it really is a dead end and doesn't serve a function. So we have those oddities in 19 areas in Belmont, but I guess the real focal point here are the 51 roads that are entirely private. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits of public ways in Belmont. This was a question that was raised at the League of Women Voters, and I didn't have this answer, and this should have been my first answer when someone asked, how does this benefit the town? Well, the number of the miles of public roads in Belmont, that number is directly is considered in the formula of how we get our Chapter 90 money, which is the state money that we use for road construction. I took this right off the Mass DOT website. It's miles of public roads, population of the community, and the number of employed residents that are part of that formula. I'm sorry, I don't have how that formula actually lays out, but as you can see on the slide, we have 74.76 miles of public way in Belmont, population 27,295, employment numbers of 7,420. All of that, when it shakes through their formula, results in $546,469 for Chapter 90 money that we receive from the state. Last year, town meeting accepted Carlton Circle. That added 0.09 miles. I know it's not very significant, but it is an addition. And should Oakmont Lane be accepted, which is under consideration this evening, it would add another 0.14 miles to the overall amount of public ways in Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. Let's go to discussion of the motion under Article 7. Chris Doyle?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I was wondering what happens if we do not accept.
Please
Can you hear me?
identify yourself. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris Doyle, precinct, town meeting member, precinct 6. I was wondering what happens if we do not vote to accept this as a public way.
Mr. Clancy?
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. So Chris, I was anticipating this question. It's a difficult one for me to answer. You know, again, one of the factors here is that you are in some small way affecting your Chapter 90 funding because you're losing an opportunity to add to your length of public roadway miles. I recognize that it's not very significant. I mentioned before that, you know, we are talking about a roadway that has 4 residential properties abutting it. And so, you know, you've got 4 residents or 4 homes that have residents from the town of Belmont that live there. For what that's worth, one of the things that occurred to me recently as a way to sort of turn this question around would be to say, if this was not Oakmont Lane, if this was Woodfall Road, if this was a road that was built, you know, in the 1950s, it is 60 years old plus. It is in terrible disrepair. The residents of Woodfall Road finally reached consensus on how to construct their road. They want to make it a public way. What would your reaction to Woodfall Road be? I don't know how else to answer the question. It really, to me, it's almost a moral question, and I don't feel like I'm well positioned to answer it because I'm not a resident, I'm not a town meeting member. All I can do is kind of throw out some suggestions on what it means, but really, at the end of the day, I think it's up to the individual town meeting members to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. Ms. Cushman, did you?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, and at this time there are 5 people with their hands up. We start with Anne Marie Lambert, Ada Baptista, Jack Weiss, Barry Lubarsky, Julie Wu.
Great. Anne Marie.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Anne Marie Lambert, Precinct 2, town meeting member. Glenn, you said that the residents were aware of the purchase and sale, but they've not been contacted recently. So do we have no sense of whether they would want to keep it as a private way that they buy from the developer? We just don't know.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. No, I don't think we know conclusively the answer to that specific question. What I can tell you is in the conversation that I had with the developer, the property owners were aware of the provision in the purchase and sale. Obviously, they're aware that they do not currently own the road because the way that the properties were deeded, unlike the other private ways in Belmont, the abutting property owners have no ownership in the private way. The developer retained that. And I think that they're all aware that if town meeting does not accept the road, it's the developer is going to own it, and they would be the ones who bear the outcome of the developer's responsibility in maintaining that road. So I think they understand that it would be a situation that they don't have control over. Unlike the private ways in Belmont, the abutters do have control. I think they recognize that they would not have that control. But again, I think it's difficult to project 25 years in the future when you're looking outside your front window and you see a beautiful newly reconstructed road. But the sense I get from the developer is that they are all very well aware of their rights and the implications of what's happening this evening.
I guess I feel like I wish that I or you had reached out to them to confirm that they would they would be in support of this, then I would be enthusiastically in support of this. As it is, I more tepidly support this article, assuming that they were not just aware, but would like to be a public way. And I like the idea of my precinct having more public ways and fewer private ways. And so I support this motion. Thank you.
So, Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. So, Anne Marie, I can add this, and this is coming right out of an email exchange I had with the developer early this afternoon. This is in reference to the abutters. In general, they have been anxious to have it presented and hopefully accepted. That's about as firm and clear as I can get in terms of the developers reporting on the feeling of the abutters.
Okay, thank you. Adibit Batista?
Oh, Adam Batista, town meeting, precinct 3. Glenn, I had a question for you. And I guess there's 2 questions. One is, are we saying that like the town will receive about approximately $1,000 extra a year for this road? So it wouldn't necessarily cover the cost of repairing a road even in 25 years.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Addie, if you've worked that formula and that's the number you come out, I won't challenge it. Obviously, 0.14 miles in the context of the numbers that are up there, I sounds right. I mean, it's not a windfall, that's for sure.
Got it. I guess I want to understand what's the, I don't know if this is for you, Glenn, or, but you seem to be an expert in most things here. So I'm wondering if you could tell me what it would be the downfall if we didn't, if this wasn't passed. So what would happen? What would be the impacting costs potentially to the town if this road wasn't public?
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Well, I think you have to sort of look out over a period of years, right? And so it's short term, very little. As the road ages, you get into the 15, 20 year life of that road, there'll be some deterioration. The interesting thing about the Hillcrest area of Belmont Hill, for example, as I said, those roads were developed in the 1950s. They're in terrible condition, but they're still somewhat drivable, I guess, 60 years later. And so, I think from the town's point of view, because this is a dead end cul-de-sac, because you don't have through traffic concerns, this really is a road that's going to service the 4 residents or the 4 residential properties that abut it. So I think if town meeting does not accept Oakwan Lane tonight, I think long-term, the implication here is that those abutters are going to be faced with some kind of a challenge dealing with the developer to make sure that that road is properly maintained, because it is an asset that they do not own. It's an asset that the developer owns. And unless they can come up with an agreement where the developer sells the asset back to the abutting property owners, the developer is going to be on the hook, and those 4 properties are going to have to deal with that developer over 20, 30 years when significant repairs are going to be necessary.
My final comment is that it's just so difficult that they're not here to speak on this. They're not actually here to think about this. So, I'm just wondering about the concern that they have of this even passing, since we don't have any information as to where they feel about this. So that's my biggest concern.
Thank you, Ellen.
Moderator Ellen O'Brien Cushman, let's try this again. I understand I've been a bit muddied. There are 11 people in line, and starting with Jack Weiss, Barry Lubarsky, Julie Wu.
Thank you. Jack Weiss, you're up next.
Jack Weiss, Precinct 1. I want to follow up on Chris Doyle's question and comment. Glenn mentioned kind of that we have a moral obligation, and I think that's probably true. I would be interested, I am not an attorney, but I would be interested in George Hall's take on this. It seems to me if transferring the road to a public way, if that was part of the purchase and sale agreement, and that purchase and sale agreement, when the property was sold, had to have been approved by a different iteration of town meeting, I would assume if the developer's expecting to have the road transferred to public, I assume he's paying taxes on that private road, which he would just as soon not pay. I think we have a legal obligation, and we are setting the town up for a lawsuit to force specific performance and gambling that we're going to be incurring legal costs trying to renege on a provision that was in the purchase and sale when this property was transferred. So regardless of whether we think the residents like it, regardless of we think there's costs, I think we're legally bound to do the transfer based on the property sale that previously occurred. I'd be interested in if George agrees with that thought process.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Before we turn to George, just want to clarify a couple of points. Jack, I appreciate the sentiment. Just a couple of things I want to make sure everyone is clear on. One, the purchase and sale agreement did not bind town meeting into any action. The only thing that it did was require the select board to put the matter forward. So there was no requirement in the purchase and sale that that town meeting was going to accept the road. The select board have met their obligation, have met the obligation by putting it forward this evening, and I think that that satisfies the purchase and sale. The other thing that I want to clarify is that I wouldn't characterize the developer as expecting the road to be accepted this evening. I think he's hoping it'll be accepted, but he understands the limitation of what was agreed to in the purchase and sale. He understands that town meeting is not bound by anything. So it's a hope. It's not an expectation.
Thank you. I don't need to ask George because that clarifies it for me. I thought it was a firmer obligation the way it was characterized earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Barry Lebarski.
Hi, this is Barry Lebarski, Precinct 2. Ade actually asked the first question of mine, which was how much Chapter 90 money annually do we expect to get from this length of road? I wanted to follow up on that. The second part of the question being, inflation aside, Glenn, how much do you think it would cost to repair a road of this length down the road, which would be, no pun intended, of course, which would be about 20 years time from now, right?
Mr. Clancy.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. So just by chance, the Gorham Road that was mentioned earlier in the process is based on a spreadsheet I have here for upcoming road work is 801 feet in length. Oakmont is approximately 700, and I forget the number exactly. Oakmont Lane is 730, so it's comparable, right? So the estimate before COVID and all the craziness with the increases in fuel costs and all of that, which we haven't seen the impact on that yet. We'll be opening bids for this contract probably June timeframe. The estimated cost is about $130,000 for Gorham Road at 800 feet, and that, as I said, that doesn't take into account the craziness in the market right now. So I don't know, add 4% annually to that and shoot it out over 25 years. And I think you have a pretty good idea of what we would expect to pay to fix that road.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Wu.
Hi, this is Julie Wu, Precinct 6. I just wanted to say that I live in a private road, which we were able to repave because we all came to agreement. And I'm in general in favor of private roads being transformed into public. But I do want to just sort of say that in this case, it seems as though the problem arises if you have a private road which has multiple abutters, as you're saying, and can't come to agreement and are in disrepair and can't get themselves to agree to repair. And what we have here before us is a case in which you have a road that does not need current repair and has a single owner, in which case it would be quite easy to agree on a repair, and which, and it doesn't need to be repaired anytime soon. So I don't have any problem with it, but it seems as though there should be a system in which private roads that actually do need to be repaired can get through this process as easily as a developer who has possibly savvy and connections or whatever it is that made it possible for this to come to us today.
Thank you. Bonnie Friedman.
Thank you. Bonnie Friedman, Precinct 3. I also live on a private road with just a few houses more than this road. We did not have that much trouble getting people to agree on the road when we needed to replace the whole road or when we needed to repair a small section. So I'm not quite sure I understand enough of the reasons why we should make this road public, but it does, I think it opens up the possibility that all the people like me and maybe Julie who live on small private roads might want our roads to be private so that we don't have to take care of them anymore. And if it's beneficial to the town, then maybe we could start a process of how we convert more roads to public roads. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman. I guess my microphone is finally working. I apologize. We have 12 people in line, and the first 3 are Barry Gaiman, Matt Taylor, and Carolyn Bishop.
Thank you. Barry Gaiman, you're up.
Barry Gaiman, Precinct 5. What I haven't heard is, does the owner of the road, the developer, make some additional payment to the town to have the road taken public? I grew up on this is in St. Louis County, a road that was private and was made public. And in addition to getting the road up to code, there was some further assessment, tax assessment on the property to pay for the town plowing and then taking over the maintenance of the road. Is that the case here?
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. I think the closest thing that, parallel that we could draw is the betterment process. If you are in a butter on a private way and you can reach agreement on getting that road reconstructed and accepted as a public way, the betterment process is the process that the town would use to back charge the abutting property owners for the cost of the reconstruction. And the term can be established, as I recall, it could be anywhere, it could be 10, 15, 20 years of a payback period. But I think that's the closest process that I can think of that aligns with what you're suggesting. The town plows private ways. They always have. I'm not aware that there's any proposal to stop doing that. This really is about the condition of pavement and fixing a road. And
Mr. Clancy, a specific question was whether there was any payment involved.
Again, Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. The only payments that I'm aware of are the betterment payments that the abutters would pay upon the acceptance of a road and the town administering or overseeing the reconstruction of that road. The abutters actually fund the reconstruction for a betterment payment. Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Specific to the developer who owns Oakmont Lane, I am not aware of any further payment, anything that else required from him to the town or vice versa. This strictly is a question of whether or not Oakmont will be accepted as a public way. There are no payments attached on either end that I'm aware of.
Thank you, because I think that was Mr. Gaiman's question. Thank you. Matt Taylor.
Yeah, hi, Matt Taylor, Precinct 1. Hi, neighbors. I went back and forth a lot on this item in the past few weeks. I ran down Oakmont Lane last week to have a more personal look, and here's kind of where I ended up. I think this project is a good deal for Belmont, like taking it start to finish, and I think it's that what's put before town meeting tonight is our best alternative. So Greensbrook Development LLC bought this larger plot of land from the town. I think it was for about $1.4 million. So the developer collaborated with the town, made a payment to purchase what was previously undeveloped land, thought ahead to discuss how the developer would build the roadway and then hand that off to the town. And that's money we didn't have before. The developer divided the larger plot of land into 4 plots, built 4 houses. They're really nice. Like, this is the kind of development I think a lot of people cheer for in our town. These homeowners pay about $130,000 in property tax per year to the town. And I see this as like a public-private partnership model that really works. The developer made money. We broadened our tax base for the town. So we have more homeowners contributing to the town of homes budget. It's not a cut-through street that's contributing to cut-through traffic. A lot of times with private roadways, one of the big obstacles to making them a public roadway is getting the road repaired and up to a sufficient condition that it makes sense for the town to accept it. And here we're being offered a road that is in good condition, was signed off and inspected repeatedly during the building process to be up to modern standards. I think kind of this is part of saying, hey, we have 4 new taxpayers in our town. We should welcome them to our team. The other part is these real estate projects are done by an LLC. So Greenbrook Development LLC was formed in 2015 as part to do this project. It's a liability management process. And they're going to go away after this development is all done and they're disposing of assets. So if we don't take it, I expect this would go to auction. And if it goes to auction, maybe the abutters buy it, maybe not. But the developer collaborated us from the beginning. And so I kind of up with, hey, this is a team sport. These homeowners are part of our team, and I think we should welcome them on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Palillo.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mark Palillo, Select Board, Chair of the Select Board and Town Meeting Member at Large. I certainly do appreciate Mr. Taylor's comments. My point of view on this is, notwithstanding the provisions in that purchase and sale agreement that I, in fact, signed when I was on the board before, whereby we are required as a Select Board to support and approve this article for town meeting, I strongly support accepting this as a public way. These are our neighbors. These are residents of our community that now pay taxes. And I believe strongly that they're entitled to the same level of services as everyone else in town that currently lives on public ways. I have worked over the years with Glenn on working with residents of private ways in town that clearly want to convert them to public ways. We plow them, we pick up the trash, but if you drive down some of the private ways in town, they are in disrepair. That creates a concern for me, concern for cars traveling down that roadway, for public safety vehicles traveling down that roadway. And I think it would be great if we can convert a number of these private ways to public. But the concern, of course, is, and the process requires us to get 100% agreement on each of these roadways to convert them from private to public, or at least present them to town meeting to accept them as public, because they are owned. The private ways are owned halfway to the middle of the street. I think all of you know this, by each of the residents. And if we were to present this to town meeting, any private way, without getting 100% agreement, then that is a taking, and that creates legal issues. We've tried in the past to convert private ways to public. I think these 4 residents and families that live on Oakmont Lane, and you're right, Mr. Pierla, we sold the land, we are getting tax revenues, are entitled to the same level of services as anyone else in our community. And frankly, I'm concerned not today, not tomorrow, but in 15, 20 years from now, if this remains a private way or owned by that developer, that it falls into disrepair. And so therefore, I strongly urge town meeting members to accept and vote in favor of Article 7. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ellen.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk. At this point, we have 11 people waiting to speak. Starting, the first 3 are Carolyn Bishop, Jerry Hosepian, and Brian Brady.
Thank you. Carolyn Bishop, you're up. Are you on?
Sorry.
What?
Talking away there. I didn't see the unmute button. Carolyn Bishop, Precinct 1.
town meeting member. We're talking about income, and I assume that the current owner is being taxed on the area of the road. And I guess the question is, we would lose that, or would the abutters take on the payment, or because we own it, we don't pay ourselves taxes? So I see it's a potential for a little bit of revenue being lost. I'm concerned, we're already giving great many services to the, as you've said, to the abutters, to the roads that are private ways, and because we're not going to let the garbage pile up and the street not go plowed. So that's not a win-win as far as our saving work, and it's not a win-win for the abutters. I guess I'm just a little concerned about the loss of the income from taxes, and that would be it for now. Thank you very much. Sorry to be so mumbly.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development, but perhaps we could bring George Hall in. I don't know whether or not we're getting tax revenue. The roadway was accepted as a layout by Board of Survey for roadway. I'm not sure it's taxed. I think probably.
Let's ask Mr. Hall.
Yeah.
Mr. Hall, do you know whether it is, or should we defer?
George Hall, Town Council. I don't know for sure whether it is, but in general, the town does not issue property tax bills on streets. So I would be very surprised if the town was collecting any taxes on this parcel. To pick up a previous point, this is owned by a single purpose entity, an LLC that was formed to develop this property. And so my concern long-term is that LLC will, now that the project is done, will go away. And so we will have essentially an abandoned piece of property. So, and it will become the responsibility of the abutters anyway, because they hold easements to be able to access their properties over the roadway. But I would be very surprised if the town is collecting any tax revenue currently on the street.
Great, thank you. Gerard Hosubian, you're next.
Yes, Mr. Moderator. I am.
Please identify yourself, Mr.
Gerard Hovsepian, Precinct 4.
Thank you.
Now, presently, this is a private way. If it does become public, what would the cost of repair be to the town versus the income that we would receive from Chapter 90? Would that be a net benefit, or would it be a loss to the town?
Mr. Clancy.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. I think the conversation we had previously with the calculation, I don't think there's going to be a significant impact to our Chapter 90 money on this particular road that is going to equal or balance out what ultimately would be a cost of repair of this road. I think you need to look at Chapter 90 as a funding source, an annual funding source that is used by my office to fix roads in Belmont. Obviously, $546,000 isn't going to fix every road in 1 year. And so you spend the money accordingly from year to year. But no, the additional Chapter 90 we receive if Oakmont is accepted, I don't believe is going to cover the cost of repairing that road 25 years out. I just don't think the math works that way.
A follow-up?
Please.
If this remains private, is the developer forced or liable to fix that road in the future?
Mr. Clancy.
Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. I don't know the answer to that. I think Town Council George Hall just sort of laid out a possible scenario, which sounded a lot to me like there's an asset that's going to be left dangling out there and someone's going to be responsible for it, and it's not going to be the developer. But I don't know that anyone can say for certain that that would be the outcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ellen?
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, Town Clerk. At this time, there are 7 attendees and and Roy Epstein from the Select Board.
Mr. Epstein, I'll turn to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This will be very brief. Roy Epstein, a member of the Select Board and Town Meeting member from Precinct 6. I think I appreciate Matt Taylor's comments. I think they're very on point, that viewing this project as a whole, I think the town did benefit in a variety of ways. I'm not going to focus on the cost of repairing the road 30 years from now, but I am concerned about the potential for the road becoming an abandoned piece of property with nobody to take care of it. And I'm also concerned actually more about the reputation of the town. Clearly, the developer went into this without town meeting approval, but there was a reasonable expectation that he would proceed with this development, build the houses, make the investment, and leave an intact development with a road behind. And if that doesn't happen, I'm concerned that in the future, people talk and the reputation of the town for future development will be seriously impaired. And I would really like to avoid that. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Brady.
Hi, good evening. It appears that what happened here was a developer entered into a private transaction with the residents. They all had attorneys. On houses like this, all the residents would have their own lawyers. So everybody went into this with their eyes wide open. And now we're gonna, after all the money's changed hands, people have gotten property, and the private real estate developer made probably a substantial amount of money on this. We're gonna get left assuming the costs of a private way that's turning public. And it's not clear to me what the position of the residents of that road really even is. It strikes me that this is premature, and that this is something that it's a private transaction that is now becoming the responsibility of the taxpayers, and we're going to be the ones that have to cover the costs and assume the liability of that road if we approve this. I have heard no reason why the residents of that road can't take responsibility for that road, or why the residents of that road can't, on their own, really initiate the process of getting this to town meeting. And maybe I just didn't hear that part of it, I don't think, but it doesn't sound like they're the ones who've been pushing for this. Accordingly, I see no benefit at all. And I have no idea how this would affect the reputation of the town. I think we're going to be fine. I don't think there's going to be a scandal around the neighboring towns if we don't turn this into a public way or anything like that. So I think we should, at this point, deny this and recognize that maybe when the private residents may get involved at a future stage, and then we can take it up at that point. Thank you very much.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Real quick, just want to state that the abutters do not own the asset and therefore do not have standing to bring the matter forward to town meeting. It's only the developer himself who maintain ownership of the asset, and it is therefore the only one that has the ability to bring it forward. Just want to make sure that everyone understands that.
Thank you. The previous speaker was Brian Brady. And so thank you, Mr. Brady, for the record. Bill Anderson.
Good evening, Bill Anderson, Precinct 2 Town Meeting member and a resident of Hillcrest. I appreciate all the comments from people that don't live in Precinct 2, but I think I'd like to say a couple things on behalf of at least myself and those of us that do suffer through the roads that we have here in the Hillcrest neighborhood. I first would like to know if the residents have been offered by the developer an opportunity to buy this road, because the last time we tried to fix our roads up here, there were a number of people who didn't want to sell them because they wanted to own the roads. And I don't see how it's reasonable or fair for the rest of the town to take over ownership and responsibility and liability for these roads, for this road, unless the residents have been offered the opportunity to do that. That's number one. Yeah, do they want to own the road? They haven't been given the opportunity. And it seems to me we're going straight from a private road to a public road through a process that is completely different than in what is required of all the other private roads in our town. Now, you know, there are many, many miles of private roads that if we were to come up with a process that could work for everybody, we would be adding a lot more than $1,036. And I agree with Mr. Baptista's calculation from very simple math. But my is that we are subjecting the existing residents of private roads to a process that is completely different than what is being taken on here. And I don't think that's fair. And I think that the process should be the same for everyone. Now, I understand that those of us that moved into the neighborhoods that have private roads long after they were built and could do nothing about the condition of the roads require 100% approval. But there must be things that can be done so that everybody is treated the same way when it comes to a fair or when it comes to private roads. And I disagree with Mr. Taylor and particularly Mr. Epstein when they say, welcome to the team. Well, when you say that, the way you're saying it, you're excluding all the other people in Belmont who live on private roads that require 100% approval. There are things the town could and should be doing to promote the conversion of all the roads to public ways through a process that is equitable and fair to everyone, for which the town takes the lead and provides opportunity to everyone. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Ellen?
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien, Cushman, Town Clerk. At this time, there are 8 attendees who have their hands up, and the first 3 are Ariana Goodman-Belcati, Ellen Schreiber, and Kara Morin.
Thank you. Ariana Goodman-Belcati, your turn.
Thank you. Ariane Goodman-Belcati, Precinct 3. And I have a question for Mr. Clancy and then a follow-up question, please, Mr. Moderator.
Go ahead.
Mr. Clancy, I know that you signed off on the design of the road. I'm wondering, was there a town employee who was present during the construction process for that road?
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Ariane, yes, there was someone from my office was present during the entire process of the construction of that road. We performed regular inspections up there. And not just on the road, by the way, the utilities that were constructed as well.
Mr. Moderator, may I follow up with another question?
Yes, please.
So if I were purchasing a house and I had the opportunity to watch the house being built, I would certainly feel more comfortable purchasing that house because I don't have a crystal ball looking ahead 20, 30 years to know what problems may arise down the road. No, again, no pun intended. So we know that this is a road that was well built. I would propose maybe tabling this until, 10 or 20 years from now, we are able to determine whether or not the road would need some kind of repair intervention on behalf, done by the town. It seems to me that although the abutters will benefit from being on a public way as opposed to a private way, it seems to me that the person who really is benefiting the most if we approve this is the developer. And it seems that this is a road that is not going to have heavy traffic. It will be mostly the residents using the road. I appreciate Mr. Palello's remarks about residents of private roads. I myself live on a private road. The abutter at the end of my road is the water department. Our road is very heavily traveled, not just by the residents' vehicles, but by the town trucks of the water department. And our road is, of course, in total disrepair. So I would be, curious moving forward if we could perhaps survey the abutters of the 51 private roads in town to find out if, in fact, that 100%, the acceptance of becoming a public way really is that difficult to obtain. And so I will vote in opposition, and I would strongly urge the town to revisit this again a number of years in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Glenn Clancy, Director of Community Development. Ariana, just quickly, this is good information, I think, for everyone in this conversation. As recently as about 5 years ago, there were a handful of residents that tried to rally the residents of the Hillcrest neighborhood to support reconstructing those roadways. There's approximately 200 property owners on those roadways. They were able to get confirmation from 40% that they would support the program.
Ellen Schreiber,
60%,
you're up. Excuse me.
60% would not commit.
Let's keep going on this. Ellen Schreiber, you're up next.
Thank you. Ellen Schreiber, Precinct 8. I call the question.
Ellen Schreiber has moved the question. Someone pointed out to me earlier, I need a second on this. So if somebody would second the motion by raising their hand, I would appreciate it. Okay, it looks like we got plenty of seconds. So now we move to the motion to terminate debate. And we'll open the polls. This requires, of course, a 2/3 majority. So you may vote on this motion to terminate debate. If it's terminated, we move, as you know, immediately to the question itself.
Mr. Moderator, Ellen O'Brien Cushman, as is our custom, I'm just letting you know that there are 11 people who have their hands raised at this time.
Great, thank you. All right, let's close the poll on the motion to terminate debate. The motion is adopted, 179 to 58, obviously well more than 2/3. Rather than scrolling through here, let's save a little time and move directly to the motion under the Article 7. So now we're going to vote on the motion itself, accepting the public way, Oakmont Lane. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Not say, but vote. I was muted. Let's close the polls and show the tally. So the motion is adopted, 165 in favor, 61 opposed, 17 abstentions. So that completes action on Article 7. We'll see how people voted. I can scroll through this. What I'm going to do on Article 9 is we'll start discussion, the presentation, the reading of the motion, and start discussion on Article 9. And if there's a long line of people, much past 10, we'll adjourn, as I've said, until Wednesday evening. All right, that completes action on Article 7. Let's turn to Article 9. Special Act Retail Liquor Licenses. This will be read by Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. There we go. Good evening, Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. Article 9, Special Act Retail Liquor Licenses. Moved that the town vote to authorize the Select Board to petition the General Court for special legislation to increase the number of licenses that may be issued for the sale of alcoholic beverages as set forth under Article 9 of the warrant for this town meeting, with the exception that in Section 2 of the proposed special act, the number 7 shall be replaced with the number 6, and to authorize the Select Board to approve amendments to the bill before enactment by the General Court, which shall be within the scope of the general public objectives of this petition.
And the vote of the Select Board, Mr. Dash?
Yes, Adam Dash, again, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. The Select Board unanimously recommends favorable action.
And Mr. Lubian, I believe the Warrant Committee has a vote.
Yes, we did, Mr. Moderator. Jeff Lubian, Chair of the Warrant Committee. The Warrant Committee votes unanimous favorable action.
Thank you. Mr. Dash?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Again, Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. Despite the wording of the motion, this at heart is a very simple proposal. This is to increase the number of retail liquor licenses. These are package store licenses, if you will, not restaurant licenses. We're not dealing with restaurant licenses. And so currently we have 2 all alcohol retail licenses that can sell hard liquor, and we in town have 4 beer and wine only retail sale licenses. The proposal is to go from 2 all alcohol retail licenses to 4, and to go from 4 wine and beer licenses to 6. And you may ask, why those numbers? Well, I can tell you that currently earlier, you may have seen an earlier version where it actually, so the 6 and 4 that we're proposing takes you to a total of 10 retail licenses. Earlier, you would have seen in the warrant that the wine and beer licenses were supposed to go from 4 to 7. But then it was well pointed out to us that that makes a total of 11. And since the marijuana licenses allowed in town are based by state law on the number of liquor licenses in town, that by going to 11, we would have triggered another marijuana license. Rather than getting into that, because that is a whole separate other discussion, we back this down to 6 and 4, which is 10, which does not trigger a new marijuana license. So that is why you see here in the motion that it's saying to pass the article as written in the warrant, except that 7 is being replaced with 6. And that's in reference to the reduction of the wine and beer from 7 to 6 licenses. So we would have 11, not 10, as I just described. I would point out for background that the Belmont Business Study Committee discussed the increase of retail liquor licenses in town to help local business. The Structural Change Impact Group further recommended possibly increasing the number of retail liquor licenses in town. I would also note there is no change to the alcohol regulations or restrictions that are currently in place, especially the restrictions on license transferability. All of this changes in this article is just the number of the licenses. All of the other restrictions and regulations are staying the same. You may recall that those transfer restrictions were put into place by more than a vote of over 90% of town meeting a number of years ago, and the state legislature also approved those restrictions in wake of the transfer of the liquor license from the loading dock to Star Market, because we wanted to put a stop to that sort of thing without having town approval. Those restrictions are still in place and will remain in place with these new licenses. So in sum, what we're doing is we're going from 2 retail all alcohol licenses to 4, and 4 with beer wine licenses to 6. That is what this is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dash. We now open to discussion of the motion under Article 9. Ji, you're first. Ji Yun Wang.
Thank you. Ji Yun Huang, Precinct 8. Adam,
I assume this is to help raise revenue, and I'm fully in support of supporting our businesses. If you can just educate me on if there's a parcel of land and a business that has an alcohol license, do we generate more revenue, more taxes through that business than, let's say, if it was a different business? Just trying to figure out what is a motivation to increase this. Has there been an increased number of requests? What was the catalyst?
Mr. Dash.
Yes, Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. Yeah, the impetus behind this was to listen to the recommendations of some of these other committees to be more business friendly. We've also heard from some other businesses that would like to, for instance, corner stores and the such would like to sell beer and wine in the cooler, along with sodas to help supplement their business. I know they've had some hard times during COVID, and to make it more convenient for residents rather than having to go out of town. Yes, obviously there are sales tax revenues for the town. I would note, just for the public, just for the members of the town meeting and for the public, the select board is the liquor license authority for the town. So if one wants to apply for a license, one has to apply. There's a set application, there's a set of regulations and various criteria that have to be met. It goes to the select board hears them and grants them or not. It then goes to the state Alcohol Beverage Control Commission, which grants it or not. So it's not a very simple process necessarily to get approved. And we do have, things in place, distances from this and that to make sure that they're appropriate. And we are, of course, going to keep things appropriate as we have.
Ellen?
Mr. Moderator, at this time, we have two people with their hands up, Vincent Stanton and Andrea Mashari.
Oh, and Robert Sue, I believe.
The first person is that you just mentioned is not a town meeting member.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
For the education of town meeting members, we usually restrict any discussion on town meeting floor to town meeting members who represent their constituents. Under special circumstances, we allow non-town meeting members to speak, but at this point, there are no special circumstances. So, Mr. Stanton?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Vincent Stanton, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. Just to put a finer point on the previous speaker's question, Mr. Dash, could you remind us the license fee currently for the two types, the beer and wine versus the all alcohol, and also whether there is any kind of, has there been an increase in the license fees since the licenses were created, or is the town chosen to hold that steady? Just trying to get a sense of the amount of increased income that might be generated from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dash.
Yes, Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. Good questions. Yes, all alcohol retail licenses, the licensing fee is $4,000 per license. The wine and beer retail licenses, the fee is $2,500 per license. I do know that a number of years ago, we did revisit licenses and fees and the costs of those. There are certain legal restrictions as to how much one can increase them. I think we tweaked some of them and we were unable to tweak others. I don't recall that these were changed anytime recently. And then that, of course, the license fees are in addition to tax revenue, of course.
Thank you.
Andrea Mascari.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have a question. I'm just wondering.
Andrea, identify yourself and precinct.
I'm sorry,
Thanks.
Andrea Mashari, Precinct 5. I have a question. I'm just wondering if there are any specific convenience stores that have requested this change in the bylaw.
Mr. Dash.
Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. We did approve one on Concord Avenue recently for a license, and I believe that might have been the last one. I believe the town administrator probably would know because they apply, and usually those requests go through her office.
Can she answer that? Thanks.
Sure. Patrice Garvin, Town Administrator. I will say that
a request has come in from Art Specialties on 369 Trapella Road. I'm not exactly sure if you can classify him as a convenience store, but I do know that he holds currently a wine and beer retail license, and he is looking to potentially receive an all alcohol retail license.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Bonnie Friedman.
Thank you. Bonnie Friedman, Precinct 3. I know that previously to get a liquor license, a store had to promise to get rid of lottery tickets and cigarettes. Is that still the current policy, so that these convenience stores would have to give that up in order to get a liquor license?
Mr. Dash.
Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. These are really good questions. We are not changing any of the regulations as a result of this. I know we did tweak the regulations. I helped write those tweaked regulations in light of the whole Star Market issue to try to restrict them, and town meeting approved them. We haven't changed anything else. I don't remember specifically because that issue hasn't come up in a very long time about the alcohol. If the restriction was there and the restriction is there, this article doesn't change any of that. No restrictions or regulations are changing, just simply the number of licenses. I would have to go and go on the town website and pull it up and take a look. Haven't looked at it in a little while in that respect. So I can't say for sure unless Patrice may remember.
Ms. Garvin, do you have no
Patrice Garvin, Town Administrator. Same, Adam. We'd have to go back and look. We aren't proposing any changes to the regulations, so anything that's in effect as of today will be in effect for any new license that the board ultimately approves.
Thank you. Michael McNamara.
Michael McNamara, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7. I just wanted to ask the Select Board what type of revenue, or maybe whoever works with sort of budget, the Town and Budget Committee, on how much revenue we could potentially expect to see by legalizing or increasing the amount of liquor licenses. Because I think definitely we want to promote business in this town, and having a restaurant that can sell liquor can definitely be helpful to the restaurant's bottom line, and maybe also to our town to help fund the key services and things we need: schools, library, making sure the taxpayers aren't.
Yes, Mr. Dash.
It's Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. I don't have a figure for you, Michael, on that. As I said, I did state what the license fees are. We know we would be getting those. So, of course, you're assuming that people actually apply for and take the licenses. Some were sitting for a while before they were taken. It does take a little while to roll them out. As far as the tax revenue, I guess it depends also on how well they do, how will the sales go, how many square feet are in the store. I think it's a little hard to predict, entirely, other than the fact that there would be obviously more than now. But I can't put a number on unless Patrice or the Warrant Committee or someone has modeled it. I don't believe so, though. It's a relatively small change from 2 to 4 and 4 to 6. I'm not anticipating massive windfalls from increasing it from 2 to 4 and 4 to 6.
Mr. Epstein.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Roy Epstein, member of the Select Board and Town Meeting member from Precinct 6. I think the previous question, I think, revealed a possible confusion that I'd like to address when there was a reference to restaurants selling alcohol. This change is not directed at restaurants that are called pouring licenses. This is really aimed at stores like Spirited Gourmet or Cuvée or Art Specialties now, who sell beer and wine. So these are like package stores, as Adam said at the outset, not restaurants. And in terms of the demand for these things, the current number of permissible licenses is maxed out. At present, we cannot offer any more retail sales licenses. So the idea here, which is unlike restaurants, we have restaurant licenses that are going unclaimed, but the selling of beer and wine in stores is a different story. That's maxed out. And the idea here was to increase the number of licenses modestly, and then we'll see what happens. If they take them, I don't know that we could quantify direct tax revenue to the town very readily, but we know for sure that if it works out, it would be a business, it would have employees, it would pay rent, and would have benefits to the town generally, much like if any other store opened in town. We think that's generally a good thing. So the idea here is to make it possible to have additional stores that sell either beer and wine or beer, wine, and other forms of alcohol, because there appears to be a demand for it, but we'll never find out unless we approve this measure. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, may I?
Yes, please, Mr. Dash.
Adam Dash, Vice Chair of the Select Board, Town Meeting Member at Large. I did manage to pull up the regulations to answer an earlier question. Currently, the regulations do state that a licensed retail establishment may sell state lottery tickets if approved to do so by the Board of Selectmen and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I guess that's the current regulation. There's no ban on lottery tickets if they have a liquor license.
Thank you. Carolyn Bishop.
Sorry, my hand is down. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
So I don't see any further hands raised. So I think we are ready for a vote for the motion under Article. Whoops. No, I saw one, but then it went down. Let's have the vote for the motion under Article 9, right at 10 o'clock. Look, Mr. Samuels, did you have something quickly to say?
Yes, very quick question. What is the length of time for each of the types of licenses? Is it 1 year, 2 years, or longer?
Did you identify?
Joel Samuels, Precinct 6.
Okay.
How long are the licenses good for?
Mr. Dash, can you give an answer to that?
Adam Dash, Town Meeting Member at Large, Vice Chair of the Select Board. Yes, Joel, the licenses come up annually for renewal, and those license fees are annual license fees. As I said, the $2,500 and the $4,000.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I see no further hands, so let's vote on the motion under Article 9. If you favor this motion, vote yes. If you oppose, vote no or abstain. We'll open the poll. A few more seconds here and we'll show the tally. All right, let's close the polls and show the tally. So the vote is 223 in favor, 18 opposed, 2 abstention. And why don't we quickly show the roll here, and then we'll adjourn till Wednesday at 6:30. All right, thank you. 2:23 to 18. Mr. Palolo, are you there? Do
I am here, Mr. Moderator.
you want to make the motion here?
I'm still here, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. I heard that you wanted me to read this, and I'm happy to. Mark Palillo, Select Board Chair, Town Meeting Member at Large, move that the annual town meeting be adjourned and continue to 6:30 p.m. Wednesday, May 4th, 2022 by Zoom.
And I will take a unanimous consent on this motion, and we will resume with Articles 10 and 3 on Wednesday evening. So thank you all for a very good discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Great work tonight. Appreciate it. Take care.